Chapter 1106. His expression changed, and he reached out to touch the space between her eyebrows. He had the ability to read people's memories, and naturally, he also had the ability to read people's dreams. If he touched her forehead, he would be able to see Ning Xuema's dream clearly. Just as his fingertip was about to touch her forehead, he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He paused for a moment and then slowly retracted his hand. He remembered that the last time he read her memories, he had angered her and almost made her fall out with him. If he did not ask for her permission and she found out, she would probably be upset and say that he did not respect her. Forget it. It was just a dream, it was nothing. He just did not expect this little girl to have wet dreams too. The man in the dream was him? The Divine Lord. He was indeed called the Divine Lord many years ago. He did not expect to hear it from her mouth. Was it a coincidence? Or was she the girl who had interacted with him before? Could it be that her dream was a dream from her previous life? Shunjuli could not help but want to reach out his finger again. However, Ning Xuema turned over and lay on her stomach, leaving only the back of her head for him to see. Shunjuli was speechless. This position. Was she not afraid of being suffocated? Shunjuli decisively reached out and turned her body over so that her face was facing up. He casually brushed the messy hair on her forehead to the side. His fingertip brushed past her forehead and did not stop. Since he had promised that he would never touch her privacy again, he would keep his promise. Perhaps it was just a coincidence that she called him the Divine Lord. After all, she had always called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes she called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes she called him the Great God. Perhaps she had mixed the two together in her dreams. He looked at her little face and saw that it was getting redder and redder. She was biting her red lips lightly, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Her appearance made his mouth dry up in an instant. He could not help but lean down again and kiss her red lips. She moaned and actually raised her arms to hug his neck, passionately responding to him. It had been a long time since she had been so intimate with him. It was familiar, warm, fragrant, tender, and seductive. Her lips were as soft as tofu, tightly entangling him. Her delicate body was pressed tightly against his body, causing his breathing to instantly become heavier. The hand that was holding her shoulders tightened its grip. "It hurts," she whispered. "You're hurting me." Shunjuli's fingers loosened slightly. Ning Xuema suddenly pulled him onto the bed. Then she turned over and pressed him underneath her. Let me do it." Shunjuli narrowed his eyes and looked at her as she sat on top of him. Her words were unclear, but her actions were not. Was she dreaming? Or did he wake up? He looked at her face playfully. Her hair was scattered on both sides of his face like a curtain. Her little face was flushed, but her eyes were still slightly closed. Was he still dreaming? Was she that ferocious in his dreams? This was the first time in his life that he was pressed down by someone. He was surprised and amused at the same time. He raised his hand to support her swaying body. He did not say anything and just watched her movements. Ning Xuema did not open her eyes. After she sat on top of him and swayed a few times, she raised her hand to touch his collar that was always neat and tidy. She chuckled. "You're buttoning it so tightly. You're such an abstinent person. It makes me want to strip you off even more, Shunjuli." Her little hand was soft and smooth as she tugged at his collar. Chapter 1107. For a moment their rhythm was messed up. Their breathing was messed up. Their skin touched and they could hear each other's breathing. His kiss and his fingers were everywhere, making her feel as if she was floating in the clouds, as if she was being roasted on a fire. She was sweating profusely, and her sweat seemed to carry the smell of wine, making Shunjuli almost intoxicated. He knew this was wrong, but she was too beautiful, making him unable to stop. His eyes seemed to be burning with fire, wanting to burn her into ashes and completely embed her into each other's bodies. In the chaos, Ning Xuema's clothes were torn, and her body was almost naked. Shunjuli hugged her. His eyes were like rolling waves, wanting to completely engulf her. Dong! Dong! Suddenly there were two light sounds outside the door, as if someone was knocking. Although the sound was not loud, it completely shocked Shunjuli back to reality. He suddenly turned over, lying on the other side of the big bed. Then he raised his sleeve, and a brocade quilt wrapped Ning Shuama tightly. Who is it? He took a deep breath, calming his chaotic breathing. His hand brushed his body, and his clothes returned to normal. In a flash he was already standing in front of the door. When the door opened, a cold wind whistled past. Outside the door there was no one. The sound just now was clearly the sound of someone knocking on the door. How could there be no one? Shun Juli's figure flashed, and he was already floating in the air. He looked around and his eyebrows wrinkled. It was already late at night, and the whole Ning mansion was silent. Other than the night patrol, there was no one else. The night patrol was a familiar warrior of the mansion, and they were all loyal people. Moreover, they were quite far from here, so it was impossible for them to escape so quickly. Did he hear wrongly? Shun Juli confirmed that there was nothing strange around, and then he floated down. He didn't set up a protective barrier, so the falling snowflakes fell on his body and head, making his boiling blood gradually calm down. He almost made a big mistake. Thinking back to the scene just now, he felt a little scared. Although the knocking sound was strange, it did him good and not bad. Perhaps it was the wind mixed with the snowflakes knocking on the door? He looked up at the sky. The red clouds were so thick that they looked like they were about to fall. Rumble. Another rumble of thunder came from the depths of the clouds. The sound was muffled and distant, but it rang clearly in his ears. His expression returned to its usual indifference and coldness. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he nonchalantly sat down in front of the stone table in Ning Shuama's courtyard. He lowered his eyes and meditated. The snowflakes danced wildly around him, but not a single one landed on him. He sat there for a while and suddenly thought of something. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Ning Shuama's bed and looked down at her. She had fallen asleep once again, and the moonlight flute was pressed under her body, with only the tip of the flute exposed. The light in his eyes deepened slightly as he deftly removed the moonlight flute from under her body and held it in his hand. The vertical bamboo flute was slightly hotter than Ning Shuama's body temperature. This vertical bamboo flute was strange. Shun Juli's palm emitted a white light, completely enveloping the moonlight flute. The body of the moonlight flute suddenly trembled slightly, as if there was something struggling inside, wanting to break out of the flute. Shun Juli urged the psychokinesis in his palm again, and a thin fingernail-sized piece shot out from the vertical bamboo flute, but the moment it touched the air, it turned into ashes and disappeared. Chapter 1108. Shun Juli's expression changed. Although the thin piece disappeared quickly, it didn't escape his eyes. It was like a dream-eating goo. This kind of goo could devour a person's dream, and then transmit the scene in the dream to the person who planted the goo. Because this goo's appearance was very similar to the flute membrane, it was very difficult to detect. And this goo was a top-grade dream-eating goo. The disguise technique actually made him unable to see through it. Shun Juli held the flute, his gaze turning cold. Who was the one who deliberately wanted to peek into a girl's dream? What was the purpose? Could it be Shuilan? In a deserted house. There was no path, the house was dilapidated, and the door was rustling in the cold wind. However, a red light could be seen faintly in one of the halls. A man in red was sitting on an armchair in the main hall. In front of him was a sparkling mirror. What was reflected in the mirror was not his peerless appearance, but a vast expanse of clouds and mist. It was very much like the snowflakes on a TV screen when there was no program on. His fingers were clenching the bronze mirror so tightly that his fingertips turned white. What was shown in the bronze mirror just now was Ning Shuama's dream. In the dream, she directly transformed into Shuiemo and Shun Juli's wedding. That big red 11 character in the big red wedding hall stung his eyes, making his fingers clench even tighter. Although he knew that those things were in the past and couldn't be changed, he still couldn't help but want to jump in and separate the two people. But he resisted in the end. His dream-eating goo had an additional function that no one knew about compared to the goo worms refined by ordinary goo masters. He could control the dream-eating goo to change the original scene in the dream and change some things. But if he changed it, it would cover up the truth he wanted to know. This was not what he wanted. So he watched in the bronze mirror as they went through the wedding ceremony. Shun Juli was indeed arrogant. On the wedding day he didn't wear the groom's red robe. but wore a white robe with plum blossoms painted on it. Only the red plum blossoms at the corner of the robe died a little happy. He watched them enter the bridal chamber hand in hand, watched them drink wine together, watched Shui Yimou hug Shunjuli's neck and kiss him, and even pushed him down on the wedding bed. In the dream, Shunjuli's expression was a little strange. He seemed to be struggling, especially that pair of eyes as deep as the sea. In the end, he seemed to have decided something, turned from passiveness to initiative. He said a sentence in Shui Yimou's ear, Shui Yimou's lips, but Shui Yilan could read lips, so he immediately read it. What Shunjuli said was, "For him, are you going to fight for him? I'll help you." Shui Yilan's mind was shaken, and he almost lost his grip on the mirror. It turned out that at that time, Shunjuli already knew Shui Yimou's purpose of trying to get close to him, but he didn't expose it. Shui Yilan was a little distracted. When he came back to his senses and looked at the mirror again, he found that the scene had completely changed. It was no longer the red bridal chamber and the red wedding bed. What appeared in the mirror was Ning Shuima's boudoir in the Ning mansion. On the big bed, Shunjuli was entangled with Ning Shuima. Because Ning Shuima was half awake and half dreaming at that time, the scene in the bronze mirror was blurred, as if it was separated by countless layers of fog. Shui Yilan couldn't see the specific movements of the two people, only two vague silhouettes. But these two silhouettes were as sharp as knives to him, making his blood rush to the top of his head in an instant. Oh! Chapter 1109. Naturally, he knew what had happened. He cursed under his breath and sent a strand of his primordial spirit into the bronze mirror without hesitation. He knocked on the door of Ning Shuima's room with the power of his primordial spirit. This method of splitting one's primordial spirit consumed a lot of primordial spirit, and couldn't be sustained for long. Therefore, after knocking twice with all his might, his primordial spirit returned automatically. He was so tired that he spat out a mouthful of blood and panted for a while. He was so dizzy that he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. By the time he came back to his senses, he suddenly heard a blood-curdling screech coming from the bronze mirror. He raised his head in shock, only to discover that there was a flash of blood in the bronze mirror before disappearing. It was as if the bronze mirror signal had been cut off. Ning Shuima's dream no longer appeared, needless to say. His venomous spell was discovered by Shunjuli, and he destroyed it so that he couldn't peek into Ning Shuima's dream from her previous life. Damn it! He slammed the bronze mirror shut and slowly walked out of the door. The snowflakes in the courtyard were scattered by the wind. There was not a single star in the sky, only rolling dark clouds. He suddenly smiled and raised his hand to catch a few snowflakes. He sniffed them, and this time even his eyebrows were curved. Shunjuli, you stole Momo from me 3,000 years ago. How can I let you steal Shuima again after 3,000 years? She will be mine. I let her down 3,000 years ago. In this life I will do my best to make it up to her. I will pamper her and make her fall in love with me. Ning Shuima woke up in a daze and her face was slightly red. She had a wet dream. And it was a wet dream that felt very real. In her dream, she and the Almighty had consummated their marriage and made love to each other. His kiss, his hands, his caresses. She had even tasted that piercing pain. The intensity of it felt like it really happened. When she woke up, she could still feel her heart beating very fast. She touched her burning face. Was she crazy about marrying the Almighty? She actually dreamed of this. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows and sat up. The brocade blanket slipped off her body and she saw the clothes she was wearing. It was a brand new and comfortable nightgown. The style was similar to the ones the Almighty usually gave her. It was a little conservative and even covered half of her neck. She stood there in a daze for a moment, and the scene from last night began to flash through her mind. The alcohol from last night was so strong that it actually knocked her out. However, she still had a deep impression of what happened in the restaurant last night. After all, she wasn't drunk at that time. It seemed that the moment she stepped out of the restaurant, the wind blew and the alcohol came back. She seemed to have almost tripped and fell into someone's arms. She sat on the bed in a daze for a moment before jumping up. Could it be that my wet dream was real? Was it not an illusory dream? The Almighty had sex with her while she was drunk. She steeled her heart and took off her nightgown to check her body. Then she found that there were all kinds of strawberries planted all over her body, even in some sensitive areas. This was definitely not something that could be formed in a dream. Then, she felt a little sore in her lower abdomen and waist. There was even a strange feeling in that area. After all, Ning Shuama had never experienced this before. All her experience in this area came from the internet or novels. She didn't know what it was like for a girl to experience her first time. She was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but look down. Then she was stunned. There was blood under her nightgown. She was bleeding. Oh God! She really had sex with the Almighty. Chapter 11:10. She actually had sex with him when she was half awake and half drunk. Damn it. Her first time. It actually happened when she was drunk. Now that she thought about it, she didn't have a deep impression of it. Even if her ideal first time didn't happen on their wedding night, it should have happened in a romantic situation where both of them were in love with each other. Drinking a little wine, holding hands, and then it would naturally happen. She would remember it for the rest of her life. Whenever she thought about it, it would be beautiful. But not now. Now she didn't even have a concrete impression of it. Too hateful. When she took the initiative to seduce him, he could even shout for her to stop in time. He was even better than Lu Xiaohui, which made her feel that the Almighty's self-control was very strong. But she didn't expect that he would sleep with her while she was drunk. What about now? Where was he now? Was he afraid that she would catch him and make him take responsibility and scare him away? Ning Shuama was so angry that she immediately took out the directed audio talisman that the Almighty gave her. Almighty, you're awake? Since you're awake, then wash up and accompany me to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding. The Almighty's voice was very calm and unhurried. Where are you now? Next door. The Almighty answered simply. Humph, after sleeping with her. He ran next door to clear his relationship with her? No way. She had to get to the bottom of this. Ning Shuama felt the anger in her heart burning even more, and her voice became colder. Almighty, why are you not at your Taoist master residence, but at my Ning residence? Shunjuli paused. This little girl was so angry when she woke up. Why? On a snowy night, I carried a drunk person back. It was very tiring. Your residence's housekeeper was very touched and felt that it was reasonable for me to stay here. I was moved by your sincerity and reluctantly decided to stay. I only let them clean the room twice. Why? Didn't you want to thank me? Thank you my ass. Taking away her chastity while she was drunk. If she didn't like him, she would have gone next door and beat him up for it. Ning Shuema smiled. Almighty, come here. I want to thank you in person. Damn it, this kind of debt was better settled face to face. It was inconvenient to make a phone call. The Almighty came over quickly. Just as she finished speaking, her door was pushed open and the Almighty walked in. How do you want to thank me? Looking at Ning Shuema's messy clothes, he frowned slightly. Why haven't you dressed up yet? Did you carry me home because I was drunk last night? Ning Shuema sat down on the chair, looking like she was in court. Yes. Did you take advantage of me after we returned to this house? Not bad. The Almighty was someone who dared to take responsibility for his actions. After a pause, he added, you pulled me onto the bed. Ning Shuema. She was the one who initiated it. She thought about it carefully and realized that she had no recollection of it. She gritted her teeth. That's because I'm drunk. Almighty, you're not drunk. If you don't want to, you can easily push me away. Damn it, why does this conversation feel so weird? Shunjuli raised his eyebrows. Why should I push you away? It's rare for you to take the initiative. Ning Shuema. She coughed and sat up straight. She looked at him like a cat. What about the Almighty? This time, it was Shunjuli's turn to raise his eyebrows. What do you mean? He actually pretended to be confused. Ning Shuema was unhappy and leaned forward. Didn't you say that I can't be intimate with you until I reach level 8? Give me an explanation when I reach level 8. You can't control yourself now. If it's brought forward, what about the future? Chapter 11:11. Damn it, would it kill him to say I'll marry you? She even had to interrogate him like an interrogation. Shunjuli raised his eyebrows and looked at her. The intimacy that I'm talking about is not the intimacy that we're talking about now. You don't have to wait until you reach level 8. Ning Shuema felt that her clever mind was confused by his words. Then what is the intimacy that you're talking about? Shunjuli paused. He felt that this girl was pretending to be confused. She obviously knew everything. But looking at Ning Shuama's expression, it didn't seem like she was faking it. That intimacy that I'm talking about is the kind that has a physical relationship, just like what a husband and wife do. Shen Jili never thought that he would be able to share this knowledge with her one day. Ning Shuama was angry. Don't we already have a physical relationship? You already took my virginity last night. Shen Jili was speechless. He obviously didn't take the last step. Okay? She almost got internal injuries from holding it in. He looked at her from head to toe and then said, "Come, stand up and walk a few steps." Ning Shuama didn't know what he was up to, but she wasn't afraid of him playing any tricks. She stood up and walked back and forth a few times. Then she stepped on the chair next to the Almighty and leaned over to look at him. "So what if I walk a few steps?" Shen Jili looked at her imposing posture again and said slowly, "If I really did something to you last night, do you think you would still be able to get out of bed today? Do you think you can still walk as if nothing happened?" Ning Shuama was speechless. Did the Almighty mean that he didn't really have sex with her? Then why did she feel that her waist was sore, her stomach was hurting, and even her lower body? Just as she thought of this, she felt a gush of blood coming out from her lower body. Her new underwear was quickly dyed red. Ning Shuama froze. This feeling was similar to the feeling of having her period. Shen Jili also glanced at her blood-stained skirt. Menstruation. Ning Shuama's pretty face finally turned red. Damn, her period of all times, it just had to come at this time. It caused her to misunderstand the Almighty, causing her to make such a blunder. Before Shen Jili stepped out of the door, he patted her on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations, you've finally become a young girl." Then he slowly walked out. Ning Shuama. What did he say? Was she not a young girl before? He wouldn't keep treating her like a little girl, would he? Ning Shuama was a little suspicious. "So I still have my chastity, I haven't lost my first time." Ning Shuama heaved a sigh of relief, but for some reason she felt a little disappointed. Looking at the marks on her body, the Almighty must have taken advantage of her crazily last night, but he was still able to stop in time and not take the last step. The Almighty's self-control was indeed not for show. Ning Shuama thought that Ji Yunhuang and Tian Shueching's wedding wouldn't be too smooth, and that there would be some small accidents. She didn't expect that the wedding would be perfect from the beginning to the end. The red wedding hall was decorated beautifully, and the guests were bustling with activity. The sound of firecrackers was deafening, and the wedding procession was draped in red decorations along the long street. Everything was the same as the crown prince marrying the crown princess. There was no deviation at all. Even Ji Yunhuang didn't have the evil aura from last night. He was wearing the crown prince's red wedding outfit. Although he wasn't beaming, there was nothing wrong with it. Chapter 11-12. When the music stopped, Ji Yunhuang reached his hand into the sedan and allowed Tian Shueching, who was wearing a red veil, to help him out. He could feel that her palm was slightly sweaty. Her hand was warm and smooth. He helped her out of the sedan and transmitted his voice to her. "You finally got what you wanted, my crown princess." The small hand on the back of his hand slightly stiffened. Her palm was slightly cold. She transmitted her voice back. "Thank you, Your Highness." Her voice was cold and did not have any warmth. Ji Yunhuang felt an indescribable anger and transmitted his voice again. "Other than this title, I will not give you anything else." The small hand on the back of his hand stiffened. Her voice was still very faint when she transmitted her voice. "Whatever." Ji Yunhuang was speechless. He felt as if he had punched the air, and there was nothing left for him to do. His other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, secretly clenched and sneered in his heart. A crown princess who did not receive any love from her husband would not have a good life in the crown prince residence even if she had the title. He would let her know the price of blindly coveting the position of crown princess. Amidst the sound of firecrackers and music, he led her step by step down the red carpet and into the main hall. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, they bowed to heaven and earth. When the last words of husband and wife bow to each other were said, the bride and groom bowed to each other, and the ceremony was finally completed. Not only did Lu Hinti breathe a sigh of relief, even Ning Shuama, who was sitting at the head of the table with Shan Juli, also breathed a sigh of relief. However, her heart still felt heavy. Although the two of them were married, Their future was still unknown. Could Tian Shuiqing move Ji Yunhuang? Could she obtain the happiness she wanted? Ning Xuema's gaze turned and saw Shui Mo's figure among the guests. She looked at the pair of newlyweds who were about to enter the wedding room and was somewhat lost in thought. The young girl's big eyes were filled with envy. She must be envious of the grandeur of this wedding. Ning Xuema secretly sighed. What was the use of a wedding without love? It was just a show for the parents of both sides. No matter how grand the wedding is, it can't hide the heartless paleness. Tian Shuiqing, I hope you can find happiness. The wedding ended perfectly. Shen Juli did not attend the banquet that followed. Instead, he left with Ning Xuema. What are you thinking about? Shen Juli asked Ning Xuema, who seemed to be lost in thought. White clouds floated in the sky while white snow covered the ground. Heaven and earth were one color, and the scenery was quite interesting. Ning Xuema sat on Shen Juli's cloud. She looked down at the scenery below and seemed to have thought of something. I hope that Tian Shuiqing and Ji Yunhuang's ending won't be the same as Yifeng's. Shen Juli didn't say anything. He just stroked her hair, smoothing out her messy hair like satin. Guru, aren't you good at fortune-telling? What was the ending of Ji Yunhuang and Tian Shuiqing? Ning Xuema looked at him with bright eyes. Shen Juli's fingers that were stroking her hair paused. He only said one sentence. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Teske. He's keeping me in suspense again. I don't want to know their specific fate. I only want to know if their ending will be a comedy or a tragedy. Guru, you didn't say 2 words, so it's not considered revealing heaven's secrets, right? Whether it's a comedy or a tragedy depends on them. The Guru said a few words, but none of them were the answer that Ning Xuema wanted. Guru, can't you tell? Ning Xuema didn't give up trying to provoke him. To me, provocation is useless. The Guru remained calm and unfathomable. Chapter 11:13. Ning Xuema shook her head. That's not right. I heard that there's no one in this world that Great God can't see through unless you've already changed their fate and changed their fate. Only then will their fate be in their own hands and no one else can see it. But Great God shouldn't have changed the fate of these 2 people, so there's no reason why you can't see it. Shen Juli's expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything. This little girl was too smart. Other people could draw inferences from one case, but she could draw inferences from 6, the fate of those 2. He had already adjusted it a long time ago. Ji Yunhuang was the reincarnation of his most prized 5th disciple, Tian Xiaoshu, while Tian Shuiqing's name was Ling Zai in her previous life. Tian Xiaoshu was a prince, while Ling Zai was an assassin sent by his enemy country. Ling Zai came to Tian Xiaoshu's side as a spy, but fell in love with him by accident and did everything for him. Tian Xiaoshu secretly found out about her identity, but he didn't believe her. He only pretended to deal with her and even used her as a traitor, causing her to be hunted down by her own country. At the most critical moment, Tian Xiaoshu saved his sister, and then watched as Ling Zai was shot to death by the pursuers. Tian Xiaoshu always thought that Ling Zai didn't love him. It was only at the moment of her death that he realized he was wrong. He searched for Ling Zai's soul like a madman and begged the ancestor. The ancestor didn't want to change Tian Xiaoshu's fate, so Tian Xiaoshu left in despair. He didn't know where he heard that the ginseng baby had the ability to bring the dead back to life, so he traveled thousands of miles to find this fruit tree. In the end, he died silently in the stomach of the stone spirit. After Tian Xiaoshu died, Shen Juli was sad that his prized disciple had died early. He also felt that it wasn't good for his disciple to die with such regrets, so he wanted the 2 of them to have a perfect life. So when he recognized that Tian Shuiqing was Ling Zai's reincarnation, he immediately used some means to give her to Ji Yunhuang. Tian Shuiqing's meeting with Ji Yunhuang when she was young was also secretly arranged by him. According to the original fate, Tian Shuiqing and Ji Yunhuang wouldn't cross paths in this life, so there wouldn't be any fate between them. Ji Yunhuang would sit on top of the world, but spend the rest of his life alone. As for Tian Shuiqing, she would be treated as a pawn by her father and given to the sect master to be his second wife. She would live an ordinary life, emotionless and without desires until death. Now, because of his intervention, Tian Shuiqing and Ji Yunhuang finally got together and filled up the imperfections of his previous life. He only hoped that Ji Yunhuang would cherish this hard-won fate, and not miss it with Tian Shuetching. Defying the heavens and changing one's fate was a technique that defied the heavens. It could not be told to anyone, let alone to the person involved. Of course, he couldn't see how they would develop in the future. He couldn't tell Ning Xuema all of this, and he didn't want to let Ning Xuema keep guessing, so he pulled her up. How's your fog condensing technique going? Show me one. Test her? Ning Xuema's eyes immediately lit up. I've succeeded. Her fingers repeatedly moved in the air, and a moment later, a small cloud of mist was summoned to her. How is it? Ning Xuema was waiting for the Almighty's affirmation. It's just passable. The Almighty didn't hold back and said, with this kind of mist, not to mention carrying you in the future, even if it carried an ant, it would still pass through. Continue to cultivate. With a wave of his sleeve, the small cloud of mist floating on Ning Xuema's fingertips disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuema was speechless. Chapter 11:14. She didn't say anything and just focused on her training, completely forgetting about Ji Yunhuang and the others. Shen Juli successfully changed the topic. He glanced down at the capital city that was far away. Ji Yunhuang, I hope you can grasp your own happiness. Master can only help you up to this point. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Half a year's time wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. The structure of the 5 countries on this continent didn't change much. To others, this half a year might just be the change of the sun and the moon, but to Ning Xuema it was half a year of rapid progress. Her psychokinesis had reached Earth rank level 6 and was on its way to level 7. When she reached Earth rank level 6.5, Shen Juli told her that she could practice the Imperial Sword technique. She could finally fly by herself. Maybe it was because she had fallen from the sky too many times that it left a shadow in her heart. She had a good grasp of the Imperial Sword technique, but she didn't dare to practice it herself. Day after day passed, and unknowingly a month had passed. Moreover, it seemed like it would continue to drag on indefinitely. In this half a year, the great god didn't just teach her in one place, but brought her to travel all over the world, thousands of mountains and rivers. Not only did her psychokinesis grow like a sesame seed, but she also gained a lot of knowledge and experience. Her horizons were also very broad. She finally knew that this continent was just a place for Shen Juli to stay. There were still many places he could go. For example, there was the ageless country, the dwarf country, the giant country, and so on. Qian Pavilion was a pavilion in the sky. The sunrise here was the most spectacular, and it was a great scenery. Shen Juli and Ning Xuema flew into the pavilion hand in hand. She had been to many beautiful places. The cold moonlight on Mount Yuehua, the blossoming peach blossoms in Luxian Park, the clouds and mist in Chongkong Country, the tall cliffs and the slowly flowing river of stars on the astrology platform. But there was no place that could compare to this place. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. The sun slowly rose from the churning sea of clouds, radiating golden light in all directions. The layers of clouds were dyed by the golden light layer by layer, and gradually, they were plated with a divine aura. The Kirin happily played with the Luan birds that were dancing in the sun. Every scale on its body shone brightly under the sunlight, making it look like a golden Kirin. The red-crowned crane danced around the pavilion, its figure graceful and graceful. Specks of light sprinkled down, making it look like a dream. There seemed to be a faint singing voice coming from far away. The heavenly wind blew, and celestial music drifted in the air. It was truly a paradise on earth. Ning Xuema and Shen Juli stood side by side, hand in hand, enjoying the prosperity of the mortal world. There was a faint cold fragrance in the air, like a wisp of cold plum fragrance in the midst of the heavy snow, making one feel relaxed and happy. It was the unique scent of the Almighty. Ning Xuema looked at the Luan birds dancing in the distance and couldn't help but sigh. Almighty, this place is really beautiful. How did you find this pavilion in the sky? Shen Juli held her waist and smiled faintly. Xuema, do you like this place? His smile was like a lotus flower in the misty rain, light and elegant. Even though Ning Xuema had been with the Almighty for so long, she was still often swayed by his smile. Ning Xuema nodded and smiled as she snuggled into his embrace. She raised her head and her large eyes were as bright as the stars in the sky. She replied without hesitation, I like it. I like it very much. Was there an immortal who could fly on 2 swords? It wasn't like she was skating. The ame piercers came in a pair. When she summoned them, she naturally summoned a pair. She just happened to be stepping on one with each foot. In addition, it was her first time flying on a sword, so she wasn't very stable. She jumped up and down, so she looked like a crab running amok in the sky. It looked quite funny. Stepping on 2 swords was a lot more stable, but if there was a strong wind, she would definitely have to perform a split in the air. Ningxuama was speechless. She recited a spell and put away one of the ame piercers. Then she shifted her weight to the other one. Chapter 11:16. The ame piercer shook violently, as if it was dissatisfied that its other half was missing. It almost threw Ningxuama off. Ningxuama cursed in a low voice after she steadied herself. The sword had become a spirit and was throwing a tantrum with her. Damn it! She tried to stabilize the ame piercer and slowly tried to fly with only the sword. At first, she flew in all directions and almost fell off several times. Fortunately, she reacted quickly, so she was able to escape danger every time. Time flew by quickly amidst this thrilling experience. After a while, Ningxuama was finally able to fly in a straight line. Her figure was also able to stand steadily on top of it. She looked like she was in the right situation. Ningxuama gave herself a thumbs up in her heart. She really was a rarely seen peerless genius in this world. Flying on a sword was such a difficult task, yet she was able to grasp it so quickly. Looking at the trajectory behind her, it was such a beautiful straight line. There was not a single bend. It was as straight as a plane. Moreover, the thickness of the clouds was uniform. Just like a straight cloud road, Ningxuama was flying around proudly. Suddenly, a person appeared in front of her. She suddenly braked and almost flipped over. She stopped just before the tip of her sword touched the person. She steadied herself and looked up to see the person in front of her. She suddenly became angry. "Shunjuli, do you want to die?" Shunjuli looked at her quietly with a faint smile on his face. Only then did Ningxuama react. Her little bit of martial arts couldn't harm a single hair on the great god's head. She suddenly remembered the scene when Shunjuli threw her down. It was like throwing a Pikachu. When she was about to get angry, she suddenly heard Shunjuli's smiling voice, "Shuama, you can't fly wrong." Ningxuama was immediately proud. She controlled the ame piercer to fly around him a few times. She could not hide her pride. "Of course, I'm a genius. You found a treasure." The smile on Shunjuli's face deepened when he saw that she was like a proud little lion. He suddenly stood behind her and whispered in her ear, "Little genius, take me for a spin." His breath was right next to her ear, and his lips gently touched her earlobe when he spoke. Ningxuama's earlobes were very sensitive. Basically, they couldn't be touched. Not to mention being touched by the lips of the person she loved. Ningxuama was so agitated that she almost couldn't catch her breath. Furthermore, Shunjuli was standing on top of her with his real body. He didn't use any qigong at all. Because of the sudden addition of a person's weight, the ame piercer suddenly sank downwards. In an instant they had fallen several hundred meters vertically. Ningxuama. Her heart almost jumped out of her throat. Damn it, she hadn't even activated the ability to carry people. She controlled the ame piercer in a flurry. The ame piercer flew up and down randomly. Ningxuama was almost flipped over. It was more exciting than riding a roller coaster. Shunjuli stood behind her calmly, as if it had nothing to do with him. He quietly stood there weighing the scales. Ningxuama almost wanted to kick him down. When did the Almighty become so bad? She tried to stabilize the ame piercer that was jumping up and down while complaining, "Almighty, why are you so heavy? Shouldn't you go on a diet?" Shunjuli. This little girl actually complained that he was heavy? He hadn't even officially pressed her down. Shunjuli's eyes darkened and his eyelashes drooped. He seemed to be seriously considering how to punish this little girl, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Ningxuama suddenly felt a chill down her spine. She had a feeling that she was being schemed against. Chapter 11:17. Before she could finish this thought, a big blue head suddenly appeared in front of her. Little Apple's eyes widened and he said in surprise, "Master, you can fly too." Ningxuama secretly comforted her frightened little heart and nodded. She patted Little Apple's big head and said, "Of course, don't you know who your master is?" Little Apple became even more cheerful. He flew a few rounds around Ningxuama and shouted excitedly, "Master, you're great. It's your first time flying and you're so stable and fast." Ningxuama couldn't hide her pride and said, "Of course, Little Apple, look. I'm also flying very steadily with the Almighty on my back." After saying that, she flew a few rounds with the Almighty on her back. She flew in a circle, and the circle she flew out was even more accurate than a compass. Little Apple's eyes were full of stars. "Master, you're great." Ningxuama looked at Little Apple's admiring eyes and felt even better. She raised her eyebrows proudly. Haha, with this skill, she wouldn't be afraid of falling off a cliff anymore. No matter how high she fell, it didn't matter to her. She could fly over mountains, plains, and oceans on her sword. She couldn't hide the smile in her eyes when she thought of this. She was already one step closer to the golden path of being awesome. "Master." Kiran's voice sounded again. Ningxuama lowered her head and saw Little Apple's bashful expression. He seemed to want to say something but found it hard to open his mouth. Kiran had always been tough and careless. When did he learn to be shy? Ningxuama patted Kiran's big head and said, "Little Apple, say what you want to say. When did you become as bashful as a female, Kiran?" Little Apple raised his big head and looked at her with eyes full of hope. "Master, can you carry Little Apple and fly back?" Ningxuama looked at the fat and strong Kiran in front of her. He was dozens of feet tall and weighed a few tons. The corner of her mouth twitched. "No. Little Apple, you can't." Little Apple continued to plead. He hugged Ningxuama's calf with his front legs and almost pulled her down. "Master, I beg you." Ningxuama was speechless. No, I think." Shanjuli raised his hand slightly and flicked Little Apple away. Little Apple was instantly sent flying. After a while he ran back, feeling wronged. Looking at the enlarged eme piercer under Ningxuama's feet, it steeled its heart and stood up abruptly. At the same time it said pitifully, "Master, please fly Little Apple back. Today is Little Apple's birthday." The moment Little Apple stepped on the eme piercer, it was like a plane being stepped on by a giant. It suddenly fell down in a parabola. Ningxuama's heart almost stopped when she descended 2,000 meters in just a few seconds. She was about to go crazy. No matter how much of a genius she was, it was impossible for her to carry a mythological beast that weighed several tons to fly. She was about to kiss the earth. She really wanted to kick Kiran down. But controlling the eme piercer had already taken up all her energy. She didn't have the time to kick it. Guru, hurry up and do something. If you don't do something, we'll fall to our deaths." Ningxuama could only ask the Guru for help. "I'm too heavy." Suddenly, Shunjuli's words came from the sky. He still stood behind Ningxuama with an indifferent look, quietly hugging her slender waist. Ningxuama didn't react for a moment. When she did, she immediately felt sad and angry. Why was the Guru so petty? Chapter 11:18. Master, you're descending too fast. This won't do. Pull me up, pull me up." Kiran felt that its master's heart was too strong. Even it didn't dare to try descending at such a fast speed. As expected, its master was the best. Kiran gave its master a thumbs up in its heart. Seeing that they were still a few hundred meters away from the ground, and then looking at the huge Kiran squatting in front of her, Ningxuama finally couldn't help but explode in the wind. "Little Apple, you stupid Kiran, get down." Her sudden outburst gave Little Apple a fright. Little Apple shook its scales that stood up from the fright and flew away unwillingly. It even asked, "Master, did you specially bring Little Apple to make a drop tower?" Ningxuama had casually mentioned the drop tower when she was chatting with it. She didn't expect it to remember it. Ningxuama's reply was to kick its Chilan buttocks. "Ow!" Little Apple howled and hurriedly flew away. Ningxuama steadied herself when she was about 300 meters away from the ground. It was only now that she had the time to look at the scenery around her. Suddenly she was stunned. The whistling cold wind, the vast snowfield, and the faint figure of the sun on the distant horizon. This place was the ice field. She had come here with a group of people half a year ago. It was polar night then, but now it was polar day. The ice and snow were still there, but the people were no longer there. She exhaled softly and slowly controlled the sword to get close to the ground. Then she jumped off. She stood in the same place. When she saw the scenery around her clearly, her eyes dimmed slightly. In front of her was a vast snowfield. At a glance it was boundless. Here the wind and snow were still there, but it had already covered the traces of the past. Not far away was a cliff. Below the cliff was a vast sea. Ning Xuema walked up the cliff quietly. Her expression was indifferent, and her gaze was distant, as if she was reminiscing about something. Ning Xuema would never forget the scene of Yanxian jumping off the cliff with Yifeng in her arms. Those people, those things, those once vibrant scenes might have faded long ago, but they had always been in her heart. They had become a thorn in her heart, a needle that would jump out from time to time and stab her. Shanjuli gently held her waist and stood side by side with her on the edge of the cliff. Ning Xuema nestled in Shanjuli's arms, her eyes still staring into the distance. She softly asked, "Great God, do you think they are together?" Shanjuli tidied her slightly messy hair and said indifferently, "Perhaps." Ning Xuema was silent for a long time. After a long time, she stretched out her hand and a green light flickered on her fingertips. In the center of the green light, a small white flower bud gradually bloomed. It bloomed layer by layer in a complicated manner. Kiran curiously came up to her. "Master, what flower is this? It's so beautiful." Ning Xuema looked at the sacred and beautiful flower in her hand and said indifferently, "Red spider lily. A flower that leads the way for souls." She continued to bloom a few more red spider lilies in her hand and threw them down together. A few white flowers floated on the blue sea, sending them far away, until the flowers completely disappeared. She and the great god turned to leave. "Great God, I want to take a look at the bottom of the cave again." Shanjuli readily agreed. "Okay." The two of them walked down the tunnel. Ning Xuema did not speak along the way, but the image of Yin Ziyuan stumbling while carrying Yifeng flashed past her eyes. It had only been half a year, but now it felt like a lifetime. Chapter 11:19. What was love in the world? It made people pledge their lives to each other. If Gu Ziyan had not cast the twin life curse on Yen Ziyuan, none of this would have happened. Perhaps Yen Ziyuan and Yifeng would have lived happily together. At that time, she only cared about Yen Ziyuan and forgot about Gu Ziyan. She did not know what happened to that bastard. The crystals in the cave were still strange. From afar, Ning Xuema saw a human-shaped object lying in front of her. She walked closer to take a look, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a corpse that was shriveled to the extreme, like a mummy that was all skin and bones, and its body was still wrapped in the dark and tattered fur of a white wolf. It lay there on its stomach, and it was so thin that its original appearance could no longer be seen clearly. Only the jade thumb ring he held tightly in his hand revealed his true identity. Gu Ziyan. It turned out that he did not escape, but died here. Ning Xuema lowered her head and glanced at the corpse. It looked like he had starved to death. Ning Xuema sighed. Serves him right. This bastard deserved to end up like this. Strange. She remembered that her acupoint sealing technique could only immobilize a person for 4 hours. If this bastard's acupoints were unsealed, why didn't he escape? Why did he starve to death without moving? She suddenly thought of something and glanced at the Almighty beside her. Did you do this? Shanjuli answered faintly. I just didn't want him to follow me. Well, the Almighty did well. The knot in Ning Xuema's heart finally melted a little. She and Shanjuli walked around the cave again. No one would come here for a few years. It was as if everything had happened yesterday. She held Shanjuli's hand and wandered around aimlessly. Shanjuli looked down at her and sighed in his heart. Xuema still had not walked out of the tragedy of Yen Ziyuan and Yifeng. The greatest taboo for cultivators was to be too stubborn. Once they were too stubborn, they would most likely form inner demons. Shanjuli suddenly said in an indifferent tone, Sometimes the ending you see with your eyes is not the final ending. Ning Xuema was sensitive enough to smell the hidden meaning in his words. She looked up, grabbed his sleeve and asked, Great Master? Do you know something? Shanjuli looked at her with amusement. He patted her head and said, What do you know? I only said a sentence of Zen mantra. This little girl was indeed exceptionally intelligent. It was a pity that he could not tell her what happened to those two people. Ning Xuema. However, after hearing what the Almighty said, the heaviness in her chest dissipated. Perhaps Yan Ziyuan and Yifeng had already reincarnated, and were now happily together. She turned around and hugged the Almighty's arm. Finally, a smile appeared on her face. Great Master, you're right. Perhaps what you see now is not the final ending. Shun Juli ruffled her hair. You're a promising child. Ning Xuema smiled. Of course I'm a peerless genius. She was interrupted by the great god. Ning Xuema's depression dissipated by half, and she became lively again. She held Shun Juli's sleeve and looked up with a smile. Great Master. I'm still missing the last ingredient for the golden sky pill. It happened to be on this ice field. Since I accidentally came here, let's go get it. Shun Juli patted her head. As you wish. Shun Juli's words warmed Ning Xuema's heart. The feeling of being held in the palm of someone's hand was really wonderful. She tiptoed and kissed Shun Juli. Her eyes sparkled as she said, Great Master, you're the best. Moi. Chapter 11:20. Shun Juli pulled her into his embrace, lowered his head, and deepened the kiss. After a while, he let go of her, who was gasping for breath. Seeing her flushed face, he couldn't help but kiss her lightly on the lips. Then he said calmly, we can more in the future. Ning Xuema was speechless. The two of them left the cave and came to the ice field again. They walked forward leisurely. The wind whistled and the snowflakes fell, but the two of them were not affected at all. Ning Xuema silently chanted an incantation and set up another barrier outside the one set by the great god. She smiled and said, Great God, you can remove the barrier. Let me protect you this time. Shun Juli looked at her with a slight smile. With a flick of his finger, the transparent barrier immediately disappeared. Ning Xuema's barrier was set up quite well. It blocked most of the wind. When the wind reached the two of them, it instantly turned into little sheep, leaving only a gentle breeze. Ning Xuema looked at Shun Juli proudly. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly paused. She focused her attention and listened carefully. There seemed to be the sound of fighting in the distance. There were actually people in such a desolate place? She closed her eyes and listened carefully for a while. Then she raised her eyebrows. There were not only two people, but they seemed to be fighting very fiercely. She had always been an onlooker. At this time, her curiosity was successfully piqued. She tugged on Shun Juli's sleeve and said, Great God, let's go and take a look. Shun Juli had actually heard it a long time ago. He didn't say anything because he was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. However, since Ning Xuema requested it, it didn't matter if he went. The two of them finally stopped strolling around and began to walk forward. The closer they got to the place, the more intense the fight was. In the distance, a huge white beast was fighting with a person. Not far behind that person there were two figures, one big and one small. Ning Xuema's footsteps suddenly stopped. She immediately recognized the three people. The one fighting with the beast was Ji Yunhuang. Behind him was Tian Shueqing and Chen Mo. A man and two women were walking together. What were the three of them doing here? Why was he fighting with the number one overlord of the snowfield, the snow flood dragon? Because of Ning Xuema's kick on the butt, the little Qilin's mood was a bit low. Its tail drooped as it dejectedly followed behind the two people. Seeing the two people in front of it stop, it suspiciously raised its head and saw the huge monster's silhouette in the distance. It excitedly raised its tail. Master! This is the white monster that chased us last time. Master! Let me go. I want to kill it. Last time it chased me around like a pig and a wolf. This time, Little Apple is going to avenge itself. Ning Xuema patted Little Apple's head, signaling it to calm down. Little Apple suppressed its desire to charge forward, but its beastly eyes were still staring at the monster in the distance. Its forelimbs were slightly arched, as if it was going to shoot over in the next second. Little Apple seemed to have suddenly discovered something. Its tail was no longer as straight as an antenna. After a while it suddenly slapped its big head. Aya! I was wondering what was wrong. Why is this one so big? I haven't seen it for half a year, and it actually grew a few rounds. What did it eat? It's so fat. Little Apple was right. This one was really too big. It was almost the size of 4 Kirin. Its huge body was indomitable. Ji Yunhuang and the rest were like insignificant ants in front of it. Shanjuli's gaze landed on the monster. He said indifferently, "This is the Snow Flood Dragon King." Chapter 11:21. Snow Flood Dragon King? Ning Xuema began to worry. This Snow Flood Dragon King looked like it had reached Earth rank level 9. Furthermore, there was a faint halo around its body. It seemed like it would break through Earth rank level 9 and become a Snow Flood Dragon in a few days. Ji Yunhuang was Earth rank level 7, Tian Xueching was Earth rank level 2, and there was also Shui Mo who was a burden. How could they fight against the Snow Flood Dragon King that was close to becoming a dragon? Should she make a move? She already had a shadow in her heart. Yin Ziyuan and Yi Feng's tragic ending made her wonder if she was really a jinx. If she interfered with someone's matter, that person would have a tragic ending because of her. However, Ji Yunhuang was already surrounded by danger. Even Tian Xueching, who was not of a high rank, no longer protected Shui Mo. She began to rush forward to fight against the Snow Flood Dragon King together with Ji Yunhuang. They were really at the end of the road. Ning Xuema's fingers unconsciously clenched tightly. Shun Juli, who was at the side, quietly looked at her as a trace of deep thought flashed past his eyes. He originally thought that she would rush forward without hesitation, but she did not. This was not in line with her usual style of doing things. She really had a very deep shadow in her heart. Ning Xuema suddenly thought of something. She turned around and pulled Shinjuli's sleeve. "Great God, aren't you going to save them? If she let the Great God go and save them without her, wouldn't that be the end of it?" Shinjuli looked at her and lightly said, "I'm not going." Ning Xuema opened her mouth. Just as she was about to say something, he added, "But you can go." Ning Xuema's eyes darkened. Her lips moved slightly as if she was swallowing something. In the end, she lowered her eyes and did not say anything. Shinjuli sighed and rubbed her head. He casually glanced at the situation in the distance and lightly said, "Ji Yunhuang will lose in less than 20 moves. Losing meant death." Ji Yunhuang's entire body was soaked in sweat. When the cold wind blew, his clothes instantly froze and stuck tightly to his body. He knew that he was about to lose, and once he lost, then he, Tian Xueching, and Shui Mo would definitely be buried here. He couldn't lose. Although the gigantic beast in front of him was riddled with wounds, they were all minor injuries. It was still very spirited. On the other hand, his psychokinesis seemed to be running out, and his entire body seemed to be drained of energy. The Snow Flood Dragon was impervious to everything. The swords and sabers only left a shallow cut on its body, which was not enough to endanger it at all. Moreover, the small but dense wounds angered the Snow Flood Dragon King even more, causing its battle intent to soar even higher. The monster looked up to the sky and roared. Looking at the battered and exhausted Su Chan, it seemed to be sneering at him, laughing at him for overestimating himself, laughing at him for putting up a stubborn resistance. Tian Xueching took advantage of the time when the monster's attention was on Ji Yunhuang to carefully climb onto the Snow Flood Dragon's back. The Snow Flood Dragon was so huge that it almost couldn't sense a tiny person like her. Therefore, Tian Xueching wasn't discovered by the Snow Flood Dragon King. However, when Ji Yunhuang saw the green figure on the Snow WRM King's body, his eyes widened. Does this woman want to die? He wanted to scold her and ask her to come down, but he was afraid that the Snow Flood Dragon King would discover her. While he was in a dilemma, he saw Tian Xueching gradually climb onto the Snow Flood Dragon King's back. His face was slightly pale, and he suddenly coughed violently as if he was injured. When he finally stopped coughing, he awkwardly retreated a few steps. The person in front of him was already extremely weak, and he was about to have a good meal. The Snow Flood Dragon King focused all of its attention on Ji Yunhuang, and every move it made closed in on him. Chapter 11:22. Tian Xueching was also slowly approaching the center of the Snow WRM King's back. She had already seen a small reverse scale on the Snow WRM King's back. That might be its weak spot. Just as Tian Xueching was about to stab its reverse scale, the Snow WRM King seemed to have sensed something and stopped in its tracks. It let out a furious roar and shook its body violently. It wanted to shake off this person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and trample her to death. The Snow WRM King's sudden movement caused Tian Xueching's sword to miss its target and only scratched the side of its back. But this time, the Snow Worm King jumped up as if its tail was stepped on. A pair of wings suddenly grew out of its back, and it instantly flew up into the sky. It shuddered up and down. The scales on the Snow Worm King's back were slippery, and there was no place for her to grab onto. Tian Xueqing hugged onto the reverse scale tightly. The Snow Worm King had already brought her up into the sky. If she was careless and fell down, she would definitely be smashed into pieces. Ji Yunhuang's face suddenly turned pale. He immediately flew over on his sword, wanting to save Tian Xueqing. However, the Snow Worm King was too fast and he could not catch up. The Snow Worm King was a strong snake since birth and was invincible in all snake nests. No creature had ever dared to touch its reverse scale, not to mention being held on to by it. It roared angrily and suddenly dived down. Its speed was as fast as a cannonball as it wanted to throw Tian Xueqing off. Tian Xueqing could no longer hold onto the reverse scale, and her body flew out like a kite with a broken string. The Snow Worm King stretched out a claw and grabbed her, holding her in its claws. Her arm was cut by the sharp claws, and fresh blood kept flowing out. The Snow Worm King opened its bloody mouth and wanted to tear Tian Xueqing into pieces. Ji Yunhuang's speed was raised to the maximum, but he was still a distance away from the Snow Worm King. He could only watch as Tian Xueqing was about to be sent into the Snow Worm King's bloody mouth. Ning Xuema wanted to rush out, but Shun Jili stopped her. Don't rush. Don't rush? If she didn't make a move now, Tian Xueqing would be fed to the Snow Worm King. Ning Xuema was just about to charge out without caring about anything else when she realized that the Snow Worm King had suddenly stopped moving. Then it used its big nose to sniff Tian Xueqing and let out an earth-shattering sneeze. Then it threw her out in disgust. Then, as if he was allergic, he sneezed 3 or 4 times in a row. What was wrong with the Snow Worm King? How could he throw away the delicious meal that was already in his mouth? Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time she was a little confused. Shun Jili seemed to have noticed her confusion and said, Tian Xueqing is a medicine man. Ning Xuema suddenly had an idea. This Snow Flood Dragon King must be treating her like a plant? The Snow Flood Dragon was a carnivore, and Tian Xueqing was a herbalist. The Snow Flood Dragon must have thought that she was a plant that had turned into a demon. That was why it threw her out in disgust. Ji Yunhuang finally caught Tian Xueqing before she fell to the ground, but the Snow Worm King's strength was too great. He carried her and retreated a few steps before stopping. Tian Xueqing was in his embrace and the two of them were very close, but her expression was distant. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and lightly said, Thank you for your highness' help. Ji Yunhuang looked at her in different expression and became angry. He coldly looked at her. Do you think that this king wanted to save you? Tian Xueqing's heart ached, but she still smiled. Naturally, you didn't save me. Chapter 11:23. Her life was still connected to Ji Yunhuang's. If she died, he wouldn't be able to live either. If it wasn't for this relationship, with how much Ji Yunhuang hated her, he would have wished for her to die in the mouth of the Snow Flood Dragon. Even she hated herself and hated her identity as a medicine person. When she was sent into the mouth of the Snow Flood Dragon, she heaved a sigh of relief as if she could finally be free. She could no longer think about it, no longer humiliate herself. Unfortunately, the Snow Flood Dragon also hated her aura and threw her back to reality. When Ji Yunhuang saw the smile on Tian Xueqing's lips, his heart ached for no reason. He suddenly flung her away and spat out a mouthful of blood. Tian Xueqing was completely unprepared and was flung away. She fiercely fell to the ground and the sharp stones pierced her skin. Blood immediately flowed out and the sharp pain made her want to jump up. However, Tian Xueqing only paused for a moment, and her expression didn't even change. She had endured pain that was 10,000 times more painful than this, so she didn't care about this small injury at all. The Snow Flood Dragon King had already lost interest in Tian Xueqing. It was now interested in Ji Yunhuang, who was obviously exhausted. It was immensely proud of itself and felt that victory was already in its grasp. It suddenly had a cat-like thought and wanted to tease this prey at the end of its road. It opened its mouth and shot out a water arrow. Ning Xuema calculated the speed of this water arrow. It wasn't very fast and Ji Yunhuang would definitely be able to dodge it. However, Shui Mo had unknowingly moved to the front. When she saw that Ji Yunhuang was in danger, she screamed and pounced forward, wanting to use her body to block the arrow for Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang was miserable. Originally he could have dodged it, but now he couldn't. The water arrow was already in front of his eyes. He could only pull Shui Mo back, but he couldn't dodge it. Yun Mo turned pale with fright. Just as she was about to cry out in alarm, a green shadow flashed by. Shui Mo's body was kicked flying, and Ji Yunhuang was sent flying along with her. Tian Xueqing kicked the two of them away and couldn't dodge in time. She could only raise her hand to block the arrow. The Snow Flood Dragon King's water arrow was very powerful and instantly pierced her shoulder blade. She groaned and retreated a few steps. Blood flowed down her body and she slowly fell to the ground. All three of them had lost their ability to fight. The Snow Worm King proudly flashed its fangs. Those fangs sparkled under the sunlight, and Shui Mo fainted with a single glance. Ji Yunhuang's face was deathly pale. His psychokinesis had long been exhausted, and his physical strength was also at its limit. He couldn't even move a finger. Could it be that the three of them were really going to die here? He looked at Tian Xueqing, who was not far away, and a trace of unwillingness flashed in his eyes. Shun Juli waved his sleeves, and Ning Xuema felt a strong gust of wind throwing her out. Shun Juli smiled faintly and said, "Go Xuema. It's your turn." Ning Xuema, who was unexpectedly thrown out, was speechless. "Guru, do you dare to change your lines?" Just as the Snow Worm King was about to open its belly and enjoy this delicious meal, a red shadow suddenly flashed before its eyes. Its speed was shockingly fast, leaving behind only an afterimage. By the time it reacted, Snow Worm King. Who dared to steal its meal? The Snow Worm King roared to the sky and chased after the red shadow. Suddenly, it heard a delicate shout, "Little apple!" It saw the red shadow throw its meal into the air. The Snow Worm King was delighted, thinking that she had thrown its meal and ran away. Chapter 11:24. The Snow Flood Dragon King was only interested in the white figure on the right. It wasn't interested in the green figure on the left. It was a carnivore. It definitely wouldn't stoop to eating a plant. It hurriedly stretched out its mouth to grab the person on the right. However, the angle that Ning Xuema threw it was too tricky. Its head swayed from left to right, unable to reach the person. Just as it was about to take a bite, a blue qilin suddenly flashed and snatched the person from under its nose. The Snow Flood Dragon King. Just as it was about to forget about eating plants, the blue qilin flashed again. Very good. Now there was no plant to eat. Ning Xuema finally threw the fainted little girl to Little Apple. The Snow Flood Dragon King suddenly grabbed it. Just as it was about to swallow Shui Mo, the blue qilin flashed by like a nightmare. Then it successfully snatched the person from the Snow Flood Dragon King's mouth and ran away. The Snow Flood Dragon King flew into a rage. Ning Xuema looked at Little Apple running towards the great god with the three people. She let out a sigh of relief. That was close. The three people almost became the Snow Flood Dragon King's lunch. The Snow Flood Dragon King spread its wings and chased after the despicable blue qilin that stole its lunch. Kiran looked at the Snow Flood Dragon King that was about to catch up. It was almost indignant. Why did its sacred and mighty qilin have to run away every time it saw a snow flood dragon that wasn't even a dragon? Last time it was still able to shake off the Snow Flood Dragon. Why was it running so fast this time? It was about to catch up to Kiran. Moreover, why did this Snow Flood Dragon grow wings? Who allowed it to grow wings? This was against the rules. Against the rules. Ning Xuema pulled out the Ame Piercer and flew into the air. She stabbed it towards the Snow Flood Dragon King's reverse scale. At the same time she shouted, "Hey blockhead, your opponent is me." The Snow Flood Dragon King naturally didn't want its weak spot to be stabbed. It could only give up on the food that was about to reach its mouth and turn around to fight. It opened its mouth and spat out a ball of fire. It wanted to give this little person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth a painful lesson. Ning Xuema suddenly jumped back to avoid the raging fire. She made a sound of surprise and suddenly laughed. "Silly big guy, you're so pitiful. You're so angry that you're on fire? Tsk, how pitiful. The Snow Wyrm King was about to go mad with anger. How could the mighty and intelligent Snow Wyrm King be associated with a blockhead? It swung its claws at Ningxuama. The little person who dared to provoke it just stood there with a smile, not even bothering to dodge. Ji Yunhuang, who was in a safe zone not too far away, felt his heart almost jump out of his chest. He shouted, "Shuama, dodge!" But it was too late. The Snow Wyrm King's claw had already slammed down, raising a huge curtain of snow, and a strand of blood gradually spurted out. Ji Yunhuang's face was ashen. With that claw, would Shuama still be alive? Tian Shueching's indifferent expression finally cracked. Shuama. The Snow Wyrm King suddenly jumped up with one leg. The claw that it raised was pierced by a wooden spike that was as tall as a person. It fiercely pierced through the Snow Wyrm King's claw, causing it to jump around in pain. Wooden spike? What was going on? Everyone was dazzled by this sudden change and couldn't figure out what was going on for a moment. A red figure appeared in the sky. Ningxuama's red dress fluttered in the wind, her long hair fluttering in the wind. Her smile was beautiful and arrogant. "Silly big guy? Does your leg hurt? You actually dared to slap me?" She was an Earth Stage Level 6 late stage genius. How could she be slapped to death by it? Chapter 11:25. She had only used the wood element in the air to create a substitute. That fellow didn't even look at her before slapping her with its claws. Ningxuama had read a lot of comics in her previous life. She had already mastered some of the moves in those comics. When the Snow Flood Dragon King heard the sound, it opened its mouth and spat out an enormous water pillar. Ningxuama's figure flashed and dodged it. She raised her hand and instantly congealed over 100 wooden swords. With a schwa sound, they flew towards the Snow Flood Dragon King from all directions. The Snow Wyrm King laughed as if it was laughing at the fact that she wanted to use small wooden swords to hurt it. Didn't she know that the Snow Wyrm King's fire could burn off all the wooden swords? It opened its mouth and spat out a fire dragon. The fire burned off some of the wooden swords, but most of the wooden swords pierced into the Snow Wyrm King's body. The Snow Wyrm King's skin was rough and thick, so it didn't matter if the swords pierced into other parts of its body. Only its back was guarded tightly, so only a few wooden swords pierced into its body. It was of the fire and water attributes, while Ningxuama was of the wood and fire attributes. In this case, the Snow Wyrm King's attributes could counter Ningxuama's attributes. This round of attack seemed to be ineffective, but Ningxuama didn't panic. Instead, her lips curled up slightly. This matter needed to be done slowly. The Snow Wyrm King spread its wings and flew into the sky. It opened its mouth wide and bit towards Ningxuama. Ningxuama stood there without dodging. She smiled as she watched the Snow Wyrm King rapidly approaching her. Just as the Snow Wyrm King was about to bite down, it suddenly paused. This human tricked it the last time, causing a wooden spike to pierce into its leg. It hadn't pulled it out yet. It thought for a while and closed its mouth. However, it didn't expect the human in front of it to be real. Just as the Snow Wyrm King closed its mouth, a green light suddenly shot into its mouth. The Snow Wyrm King howled in pain as a long and thick wooden spike pierced its mouth. The pain was unbearable, and it even felt a little itchy. In its rage, it didn't think much and continued to extend its claws, wanting to slap Ningxuama to death. The moment Ningxuama sent out her wooden swords, she disappeared without a trace. Then, she suddenly appeared right above the Snow Flood Dragon King's back. With lightning speed, she condensed over 100 wooden swords and stabbed them towards the Snow Flood Dragon King's reverse scale. The Snow Wyrm King seemed to have sensed something. It tried to dodge, but for some reason it suddenly felt dizzy and powerless. Hundreds of wooden spikes pierced into its back, and 4 to 5 wooden spikes pierced into its reverse scale. The Snow Wyrm King howled in pain as blood gushed out from its reverse scale. The Snow Wyrm King tried its best to escape, but its wings were powerless. In the end, it could no longer support itself and crashed heavily onto the ground. Its back hit the ground first, and hundreds of wooden spikes pierced into its flesh. It howled in pain again, but this time its voice was much softer. The snow under its body had already been dyed red, with a tinge of green. The Snow Wyrm King's mouth also started to spit out blood. But it was all green blood that was suffused with an ominous glow. Ning Xuema's attributes were indeed suppressed by the Snow Wurm King, but don't forget that she was also a poison doctor. In this half a year of cultivation, she hadn't been idle. She had refined quite a number of poisons. The Snow Wurm King's back had been poisoned by 3 to 4 different poisons, and the wooden spike in its mouth had been stained with a bottle of poison. Even though the Snow Wurm King had thick skin and thick nerves, it was still paralyzed by the poison. This gave Ning Xuema the chance to pierce its weak point. Chapter 11:26. Today it had gone against Ning Xuema. In any case, it would either be poisoned to death or stabbed to death. After Ning Xuema saw that the Snow Wurm King had indeed breathed its last, she clapped her hands and smiled as she gave the great god an okay gesture. It indicated that she had successfully completed her task. Then she wanted to fly over to check on Tian Xueching and the rest's injuries. Shun Juli looked at her flying over in high spirits and smiled faintly. He waved his sleeves and a gust of wind blew her back to the Snow Wurm King's side. Amidst the whistling wind, Shun Juli's voice was exceptionally clear, as though it was right beside her ear. Retrieve the crystal pillar from the Snow Wurm King's body. Ning Xuema. All right, since the great god had instructed her, she would just do as he said. Shun Juli had unknowingly appeared beside her, and was leisurely supervising her. She was panting as she dug out the crystal pillar and asked, "Great God, how are Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueching?" Shun Juli casually said, "Don't worry, they won't die." Ning Xuema. All right, as long as they won't die. Kiran flew over with the 3 people on its back. With a shake of its body, it threw the 3 people down. Ji Yunhuang sat on the ground and was about to meditate when he suddenly thought of something. He looked around and saw Shui Amo lying quietly beside him. He was startled and realized that Tian Xueching, who was supposed to be beside him, was sitting in the snow some distance away from him. Her eyes were slightly closed and her face was pale. She was quietly meditating. She was severely injured, and her arm and shoulder were still bleeding profusely. Ordinary medicine had no effect on her at all. Only he had medicine that was specially made for medicine men. However, she was avoiding him like he was a fierce beast, and was not even willing to stay by his side. Ji Yunhuang's heart was suddenly filled with anger. This must be her trick to make him feel sorry for her. She was even playing hard to get and staying so far away from him. He wanted to see how long she could last. In the end, she would definitely take the initiative to run over. Ji Yunhuang fiercely averted his gaze. He could not be deceived by her delicate appearance. Shui Amo groaned and slowly woke up. When she saw Ji Yunhuang beside her, she abruptly hugged his arm. Big brother Yunhuang. What was Shimo is so scared. Shimo almost couldn't see big brother Yunhuang again. Ji Yunhuang pulled her into his embrace and comforted her in a low voice. Amo, don't be afraid. Everything is fine now. Shui Amo suddenly hissed and her brows furrowed slightly. When she raised her head again, her large eyes were already filled with tears and her voice was filled with grievance. Big brother Yunhuang, Amo's body hurts. Ji Yunhuang's psychokinesis circulated around Shui Mo's body, but there didn't seem to be any wounds. Where does it hurt? Shui Mo said pitifully, my knee is bruised. It hurts, Ji Yunhuang frowned. What happened? Did Tian Xueching not take good care of you? He couldn't help but look at Tian Xueching, who was not far away, and suddenly realized that she was quietly looking at him. Her ink-black eyes were heavy and emotionless. Shui Mo shook her head. No, big sister Xueching protected me very well. In order to protect me, big sister Xueching pushed me out. I was careless and knocked against the rock. Ji Yunhuang coldly questioned Tian Xueching. Is what Shui Mo said true? What else do you have to say? Although he knew that Tian Xueching was also protecting Shui Mo, Ji Yunhuang couldn't help but speak sharply when he saw her indifferent expression. Chapter 11:27. Tian Xueching lowered her eyes slightly and felt a stab of pain in her heart. After half a year of being misunderstood and wronged, she still had not gotten used to it. After a while, she looked up and her expression darkened. With an indifferent expression she said, I have nothing to say. Ji Yunhuang was a little upset. Seeing that blood was still seeping out of Shui Mo's wound, he became even more upset. His voice instantly turned cold. Why are you still standing there? You pushed Shui Mo down and injured her. Why aren't you healing her? Shui Mo helplessly tugged at Ji Yunhuang's sleeve and was so anxious that he almost cried. Big brother Yunhuang. Don't blame big sister Xueqing. Big sister Xueqing also has many injuries on her body. Most small injuries. Ji Yunhuang pulled out his sleeve. Don't say any more. Shui Mo was so scared that she kept quiet. Tian Xueqing suddenly felt that it was a little ironic. Was she so pitiful that she was pitted to the point of being pitted by a little girl? It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. I don't care anymore. It's going to end soon. Tian Xueqing silently walked over. With a flip of her hand, a sharp dagger appeared in her palm. Without any change in her expression, she made a cut on her arm. The wound that had stopped bleeding earlier immediately started to bleed again. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. He almost wanted to strangle the woman in front of him. His eyes were about to burst into flames. Tian Xueqing, are you doing this on purpose? You could have just cut a small wound. Are you trying to trick me? Before the old wound on her arm healed, new wounds were added to it. Bright red blood kept flowing out. It was a little dazzling for him. However, as if she did not feel it, she pulled Shui Mo's leg over and dripped the blood on her knee. The small wound on Shui Mo's knee emitted a faint halo. In the halo, Shui Mo's wound gradually healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as smooth as before. After Tian Xueqing finished dripping the blood, her face became even paler. It was almost the same color as the surrounding snow. She did not even look at Ji Yunhuang. She closed her eyes and quietly meditated. Ji Yunhuang was completely ignored. His face turned slightly green from anger. You purposely made this appearance for me to see, right? Tian Xueqing, you are really scheming. Tian Xueqing suddenly opened her eyes and smiled faintly. You flatter me. Although she was smiling, her eyes were filled with sorrow. How did she and he end up like this? Half a year of being the crown princess was like purgatory, and all of her love had been worn away. Yunhuang choked. After a long while, he threw over a small bottle and coldly said, Don't die on the road. No one will collect your corpse. Ning Shuama almost wanted to slap Ji Yunhuang to death. What was he saying? She wanted to discipline him, but now was not the time to be distracted. Tian Xueqing's face was pale, and her eyes were as dark as ink. She kept smiling and nodded. All right, I won't die on the road. Your Highness can rest assured. With that, she picked up the ointment and applied it on herself. Her actions affected her wound, but she only paused for a moment. She didn't even frown before continuing to apply the ointment. Ning Shuama had already dug out the crystal pillar inside the Snow Wrm King's body. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Great God! There are actually 2 crystal pillars inside the Snow Wrm King's body, one ice and one fire. Shun Juli took a look and waved his hand. The 2 crystal pillars were taken out and placed neatly on Ning Shuama's palm. The great god's words were simple but crucial. Absorb. Ning Shuama could only sit cross-legged and slowly absorb the energy in the crystal pillars. Chapter 11:28. Water was wood. The crystal pillar nourished the wood element in her body, and the fire element was naturally absorbing the fire crystal pillar at the same time. As the 2 crystal pillars were gradually absorbed, Ning Shuama felt that her power had increased a little. It was as if there was an endless amount of psychokinesis in her body. She looked at Tian Xueqing, who was applying medicine to her wounds, and an idea came to her mind. A green light was emitted and gently enveloped Tian Xueqing. After a while, she withdrew her technique and asked with a smile, Xueqing, are you feeling better? Tian Xueqing felt that the pain in her body seemed to have lessened a lot. She smiled faintly and felt a warmth in her heart. Shuama, thank you. Ning Shuama smiled and shifted her gaze to Ji Yunhuang. She casually healed him and waved her hand. No need to thank me. Ji Yunhuang looked at her with a complicated gaze. Shuama. Seeing Han Shangyue, who was beside her, his gaze darkened. He then asked softly, Are you alright? It was a normal greeting. Ning Shuama was about to reply when Kiran suddenly shouted, as if he had discovered a new continent, Master! Master! Don't you think this little girl looks a little like you when you were young? I was wondering why she looks so familiar just now. Ning Shuema was stunned. She carefully looked at Shui Mo and her heart sank. She was wondering why she felt that this little girl looked so familiar when she first saw her. Kiran saw Ning Shuema's slightly gloomy expression and his heart thumped. He immediately said loudly, of course, only a little bit, just a little bit. Shui Mo's face was slightly similar to Ning Shuema's, especially the expression when Shui Mo tilted her head and looked at people. Ji Yunhuang's face instantly turned pale. He had found a substitute who looked slightly similar to Shuema. He originally thought that it would not be discovered, but he did not expect to be exposed in front of everyone. Shui Mo helplessly grabbed Ji Yunhuang's sleeve, as if she did not understand why everyone's gaze was suddenly focused on her. She shrunk behind Ji Yunhuang and said softly, "Brother Yunhuang." At this moment, Ji Yunhuang could not hear Shui Mo at all. His mind was filled with random thoughts. How would Shui Mo react? Would she cut ties with him? Ning Shuema faintly glanced at Ji Yunhuang and sighed. You should properly cherish Shueching. Ning Shuema didn't want to get involved in their affairs. She still remembered the last time she interfered, so she wouldn't interfere this time. She pulled Shinjuli's hand and said with an indifferent expression, "Guru, let's go." The two of them left hand in hand. Ji Yunhuang's lips moved. He wanted to urge them to stay, but he couldn't find a reason to do so. He could only stare blankly as the two of them walked away. Their figures slowly disappeared into the horizon. Tian Shueching looked at him quietly, a complicated look flashing through her dark eyes. She loved Ji Yunhuang, but she couldn't get him. On the other hand, he loved Shuema, but Shuema treated him like a normal friend. It was truly a miraculous cycle of reincarnation. He injured himself and Shuema hurt him. This should be retribution. Tian Shueching looked at Ji Yunhuang's pale face and suddenly felt a burst of joy. This joy was accompanied by heartache, causing her heart to tighten. She suddenly lowered her head and coughed incessantly. Her voice was heart-wrenching. She covered her mouth with her hand and coughed for a long time before she stopped. When Ji Yunhuang saw her like this, his heart was in a mess. It was as if he was annoyed, but at the same time, his heart ached for her. He asked dryly, "What's wrong?" Tian Shueching's palm was a little red. She replied as if nothing had happened. Nothing. She secretly wiped the blood off her palm on the snow. Chapter 11:29. She stood up and said indifferently, "Let's continue on our way." Ji Yunhuang stood up and did not even look at Tian Shueching. He pulled Shui Mo and walked forward. Tian Shueching silently followed behind him. The wind in the snowy plains was strong and Shui Mo could not stand the cold air. Ji Yunhuang set up a barrier to isolate himself from Shui Mo and the wind. Shui Mo mumbled, "Brother Yunhuang, Sister Shueching is also very cold. You should set up a barrier for her too." Ji Yunhuang turned around to look at Tian Shueching. Seeing that her expression was still indifferent, he turned back and continued to talk to Shui Mo. Tian Shueching felt cold all over. The wind in the snowy plains was bone-chilling and she almost lost consciousness. She looked in front and saw that Shui Mo looked very comfortable inside the barrier. He was talking and laughing with Ji Yunhuang as they walked forward. A snowflake fell on her hair. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand and brushed it away for her. His every action was filled with affection. Tian Shueching looked away. She knew that she would never have this kind of warmth. The cold wind stimulated the hidden injuries in her body, and she could not help but cough again. Ji Yunhuang subconsciously turned around and saw her wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth. He stopped in his tracks. Shui Mo curiously turned around, but Tian Shueching had already returned to normal. She pulled Ji Yunhuang's sleeve and asked, "Brother Yunhuang, what's wrong?" Ji Yunhuang's footsteps only paused for a moment before he continued to hold Shui Mo's hand and walked forward. He said calmly, "Nothing." However, when Shui Mo spoke to him again, Ji Yunhuang would only answer one sentence out of every 10 sentences she said. He seemed to be absent-minded. After a while, Ji Yunhuang suddenly raised his hand and a white light instantly enveloped Tian Shueching. The wind and snow around her immediately weakened. Did Ji Yunhuang set up a barrier for her? Tian Shueching looked at him in astonishment. After a while she quietly said, "Thank you, Your Highness." Ji Yunhuang did not pay attention to her, and continued to talk with Shui Amo. Tianshueqing's voice floated in the wind and sounded a little lonely. She slightly lowered her eyes and told herself not to think too much. He was just taking pity on her. Her warm heart turned cold again. Just like the words that fell into the wind and no one answered. The three of them walked for another half a day. After all, Shui Amo was still a child and could not endure such trekking. She could not take it anymore and staggered. If Ji Yunhuang had not caught her in time, she would have fallen to the ground. Shui Amo looked at Ji Yunhuang pitifully. Big brother Yunhuang, our Amo is so tired. Ji Yunhuang looked at the frail Tianshueqing behind him and said, then let's rest for a while. The three of them sat down. Tianshueqing and Ji Yunhuang were meditating, but Shui Amo couldn't sit still at all. Ji Yunhuang made her move so much that he almost suffered from qi deviation. He opened his eyes helplessly and asked, Amo, what's wrong? Where do you feel uncomfortable? Ink Shui shook his head like a rattle drum. No, our Amo is very good. Before he could finish, his stomach growled. Shui Amo. She patted her stomach in annoyance and said anxiously, our Amo is not hungry at all. Not to be outdone, his stomach growled again. This time it was very loud. Even Tianshueqing, who was meditating not far away, opened her eyes and quietly looked at them. Ji Yunhuang. He helplessly patted Shui Amo's head. Wait. He turned his head and said to Tianshueqing, who was not far away, take good care of her. They had already finished their food, so they could only hunt by themselves. Chapter 11:30. He had just walked a short distance when he suddenly felt the ground shaking. He almost couldn't stand still. Ah! Brother Yunhuang, save me! Shui Amo suddenly screamed. Ji Yunhuang turned his head and saw that the ground had suddenly split open and Shui Amo had instantly fallen in. Xueqing was not far from him. She flashed to the edge of the crack and seemed to want to jump in as well. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed. What are you doing? Get out of the way. However, Tianshueqing's figure only paused for a moment before she decisively jumped down. Ji Yunhuang only managed to grab a piece of her clothes. With a ripping sound, her clothes were torn apart, leaving only a small piece of cloth in his hand. It still carried the faint warmth of her body. He looked down and saw that the crevice was so deep that he couldn't see the bottom. The two people had already disappeared. Shui Amo. Xueqing. Just as he steeled his heart and was about to jump down, the ground suddenly shook again, and the crack in the ground closed up like a huge mouth. From the moment the ground shook to when the dust settled, everything happened in less than 10 seconds. In less than 10 seconds everything returned to normal, but two people were missing. Yunhuang's mind was blank. His mind was filled with Tianshueqing's resolute figure when she jumped down. What was she doing? Was she going to kill herself to take revenge on him? This thought made Ji Yunhuang's hands and feet tremble. He wanted to use magic to open the crack, but he was afraid that he would hurt the two people underground. In the end, he could only use his hands to open the crack. Tianshueqing did not jump down to save Shui Amo. She was not so kind and magnanimous that she would risk her life to save a girl who was intimate with Ji Yunhuang every day. Saving her was just on the way. She jumped down because she saw the serene orchid grass on the cliff. This was the purpose of their group. Tianshueqing had already done the preliminary work. As long as she took the serene orchid grass and fed it to Ji Yunhuang, he would no longer have to be affectionate with her every 2 days. He would no longer have to look at her as if she was his mortal enemy. She would be able to set him free and let herself go. It was time for this petty and unrequited love to end. After she saved Shui Amo, she jumped up and took down the serene orchid grass with a few leaps. She lightly tapped on the cliff and flew up. However, she did not expect the crack to close instantly. She watched helplessly as the path to survival closed before her eyes. She was shocked, and her psychic power dissipated, causing her to fall. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and kicked the cave wall with her toes to slow down the speed of her fall. Otherwise, she would have fallen to her death. Just as they were about to land on the ground, she saw Shui Amo looking at her with teary eyes in the light of the orchids. That look reminded her of the time when she was 14 years old, when she was faced with a treacherous person in despair. He couldn't bear to see her like this, so he pulled her into his embrace. Bang! Tian Xueqing crashed heavily onto the ground. The gravel on the ground pierced into Tian Xueqing's body. Tian Xueqing's face paled. She didn't even need to look to know that her back had been pierced into a mess. Shui Mo was protected in Tian Xueqing's arms, so he didn't suffer any injuries. However, he was too frightened and didn't dare to move. Tian Xueqing felt pain all over her body. She sucked in a breath of cold air and frowned. Her face turned even paler. Shui Mo asked with a trembling voice, "Sister Xueqing, what's wrong?" Tian Xueqing only recovered after a long time. She whispered, "Get down." Shui Mo was stunned for a moment before he scrambled down from her body. He reached out his small hand to Tian Xueqing and said, "Sister Xueqing, let me help you up." Chapter 1131. Tian Xueqing ignored the outstretched hand and slowly got up. Every time she moved, she felt a heart-wrenching pain. She bit her lips until they bled. Finally, she sat up slowly and passed a small bottle to Shui Mo. She said calmly, "Help me apply the medicine. My back." Shui Mo took the small bottle and turned it to Tian Xueqing's back. "Sister Xueqing, let me help you take off your shirt." When Shui Mo saw the bloody wounds on her back, he was so scared that his hands trembled. He gently touched her back and asked, "Sister Xueqing, does it hurt?" She was on the verge of tears. Tian Xueqing did not say anything. She sat there quietly and meditated to heal herself. Shui Mo applied the medicine bit by bit. She was inexperienced and accidentally hurt Tian Xueqing a few times, causing Tian Xueqing's body to stiffen. However, Tian Xueqing recovered in an instant and allowed her to continue applying the medicine. There was only her and Shui Mo in this place. There was no better choice, so she could only let this newbie do it. After applying the medicine, Shui Mo tore off her clothes and wanted to bandage Tian Xueqing's wounds. Tian Xueqing said quietly, "There's no need. Help me put on my clothes." Shui Mo did as she was told and sat beside her. Tears rolled down her cheeks and were about to fall. Her voice trembled slightly. "Sister Xueqing, will we die here?" Tian Xueqing said calmly, "No." Shui Mo's eyes lit up. "Sister Xueqing, when can we leave?" Tian Xueqing only said one word. "Wait." After saying that, she closed her eyes and sat there quietly. She began to regulate her breathing and heal herself. Shui Mo wanted to say something, but when she saw Tian Xueqing's cold expression, she was so scared that she did not dare to say anything. She sat close to Tian Xueqing, as if she was afraid that someone would take her away. After all, she was still a child. In a situation where she was tired, hungry, and scared, her head started to nod in the end. Her head tilted and she leaned on Tian Xueqing's body. She had already fallen asleep. Tian Xueqing glanced at her and let her lean on her to sleep. Tian Xueqing circulated her energy for a while, and finally felt that her body was not as painful. Perhaps it was because of the medicine, the wounds on her back were not as painful. Suddenly, a tentacle emerged from the ground and wrapped around Shui Mo's foot. He pulled her down. Shui Mo suddenly woke up. Seeing the tentacles around his ankle, he hurriedly struggled but failed to break free. He was so frightened that he burst into tears. She hugged Tian Xueqing's arm. "Sister Xueqing, save me." Tian Xueqing was startled awake from her meditation. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw a tentacle sticking out of her. Startled, she broke free from Shui Mo's hand and retreated. At the same time, she drew her sword. The tentacle suddenly attacked, but was cut down by her sword. She leaped in front of Shui Mo, and Shui Mo's left leg had already sunk in. Tian Xueqing picked up Shui Mo and tried to pull him out, but he couldn't move at all. But in vain, it sank down a little more. Tian Xueqing looked at Shui Mo, who was scared out of his wits and crying out loud. A look of pity flashed across her eyes. She then pulled out her sword and said softly, "Bear with it." Blood splattered everywhere. Shui Mo screamed and fainted from the pain. Tian Xueqing picked Shui Mo up and hit a few of her major acupoints to stop the bleeding. Then she cut off the tentacle that was following closely behind. She suddenly leaped up. Shui Mo's broken leg was still bleeding profusely. This caused the tentacles to chase after them even more crazily. In the vast ice field there were countless monsters. Tian Xueqing couldn't figure out what these tentacles were. Chapter 1132. The speed of this thing was extremely fast. It danced under her feet and almost entangled Tian Xueqing's feet. Tian Xueqing knew that only by throwing Shui Mo away would she have a chance to survive. However, looking at the little girl in her arms, she could not bear to do so. She was the girl that Ji Yunhuang loved and cared for with all his heart. If she died, Ji Yunhuang would be very sad. Forget it. She would just do one last thing for Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing hugged Shui Mo tightly. She stepped on the wall of the cave and flew up a little. The number of tentacles below her had reached more than 100, densely packed like snakes as they chased after her. There were a few times when they almost pulled Tian Xueqing down. Luckily, she reacted quickly and avoided them. Suddenly a ray of light appeared. The ray of light became bigger and bigger, closer and closer. She was already very close to the top of the cave. When Tian Xueqing arrived, the entrance of the cave was already big enough for two people to pass through. She suddenly jumped up. Her eyes lit up, but her body suddenly sank. Her heart tightened as she felt a tentacle coiling around her ankle. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing reacted quickly. She threw Shui Mo away and stabbed her sword into the ground. Half of her body was stuck at the entrance of the cave. Ji Yunhuang hugged her with his hands full of blood. His voice trembled as he said, Xueqing. The moment he saw her head, Yunhuang was ecstatic. He hugged her tightly and tried his best to pull her out. At this moment Tian Xueqing's body was already entangled with more than 100 tentacles. He could not pull her out at all. He could only watch her body sink bit by bit. Ji Yunhuang hugged her tightly and did not let go. He used so much strength that his veins popped out. However, he was still unable to stop her from sinking. The pain of losing her forever spread wildly in his heart. His voice was trembling as he said, Xueqing, Xueqing. Tian Xueqing's body sank bit by bit. Ji Yunhuang hugged her tightly and his body sank as well. Let go. Tian Xueqing suddenly shouted. If he did not let go, both of them would fall down. Xueqing. Ji Yunhuang was not willing to let go. He grabbed her tightly and said, I'll carry you up. If he carried her, both of them could only fall down. Tian Xueqing raised her finger. A bright light flew up and went straight for Ji Yunhuang's chest. Ji Yunhuang was shocked and his body flashed. Tian Xueqing, who was in his arms, suddenly sank down. Ji Yunhuang hurriedly tried to grab her again, but he only managed to grab one of her hands. At this moment, there were 100 tentacles wrapped around her body. The ground was dark and boundless, but Tian Xueqing's eyes were astonishingly bright, like stars in the cold night. She even smiled. Your Highness, you don't have to collect my corpse now. That smile was like an epiphyllum in the cold night, blooming in an instant with a cool fragrance. The few times Ji Yunhuang smiled at her was a long time ago. Although she was cold at that time, she was passionate about him. Since when did she gradually lose her smile? She became more and more distant from him, and the way she looked at him became more and more indifferent, as if she was looking at a complete stranger. And since when did his eyes start to revolve around her more and more? Her distant gaze almost drove him crazy. He began to spend all day with Shui Mo, just to see her indifferent expression crack and change into one of jealousy or sadness. It would be fine as long as she was not so indifferent to him. But she did not even once. Tian Xueqing only looked at them quietly. Under her indifferent gaze, for the first time he felt like a clown. Chapter 1133. Now he finally saw her smile again, but he did not expect that it would be the last time. Ji Yunhuang's heart ached so much that he curled up into a ball. The pain caused his whole body to tremble, and he almost lost his grip on her hand. Tian Xueqing said softly, Your Highness, I have placed the serene orchid grass on Shui Mo. You don't have to worry. There was no need to hold on so tightly. Even if she died, she would not be a hindrance to him anymore. Her mission had already been completed. Ji Yunhuang's voice trembled strangely. It sounded like he was crying and laughing at the same time. Xueqing, forgive me. Tian Shueqing smiled and shook her head. Let's not meet again in the next life. Feeling Tian Shueqing slowly let go of his hand, the usually calm Ji Yunhuang could no longer remain calm. His face was filled with panic, and his voice trembled. Shueqing, don't let go. This prince orders you not to let go. Tian Shueqing smiled and shook her head. Her expression was relaxed, as if she had finally been freed. She looked at him one last time and said, Shueqing is already dead. A new person can be appointed. Be happy for 100 years and have many children and grandchildren. Then she let go of his hand and fell into the endless abyss. Shueqing. The last thing Tian Shueqing saw was Ji Yunhuang's red eyes and a hideous expression of pain. The crack in the ground that he had painstakingly dug closed again. Ji Yunhuang stood there in a daze. Her last smile flashed before his eyes. He thought that she would pester him for a lifetime and that she would never let go of his hand, but he did not expect that. Tian Shueqing, didn't you want the position of crown princess? Why did you let go? Why did you let go? Ji Yunhuang suddenly looked like a madman as he dug at the crack in the ground. Tian Shueqing, I won't allow you to give up. I won't allow you to give up. Tian Shueqing, come back. Ning Xuema's imperial sword technique was already quite stable. After she and Shun Jili collected herbs from the ice plains, they went to several places to train. When the two of them returned to the Sun Moon sect, 2 to 3 months had already passed. Ning Xuema had also successfully advanced and was now at Earth rank level 7. The two of them went straight to the heavenly sound peak. Shun Jili's sound-transmitting talisman suddenly rang. He picked it up and said indifferently, What's the matter? Yelu Jing's gentle voice came from the talisman. Master, Ji Yunhuang requests an audience. Shun Jili frowned slightly. After a while he said, Approved. Ji Yunhuang's sudden request for an audience made Ning Xuema's heart sink. Could something have happened? When Ji Yunhuang walked in, Ning Xuema's eyes widened in shock. Was the person in front of her really that lofty and arrogant crown prince Ji Yunhuang? His face was pale and haggard, and his eyes were empty. He looked like he had lost his soul. Ning Xuema's heart sank even more. She asked Yunhuang, what happened to you? Ji Yunhuang glanced at Ning Xuema and revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. Xuema. Shueqing is dead. Ning Xuema suddenly stood up. Shueqing is dead. Such a good girl, a girl who loved Yunhuang so deeply, was actually dead? Ning Xuema slowly sat back down in her chair. She was in a daze. Ji Yunhuang suddenly started coughing violently, as if he was going to vomit out his heart. Ning Xuema was speechless. Her fingers slightly tightened. Ji Yunhuang's face was pale and there was blood at the corner of his lips. He was coughing up blood. It was obvious that his heart was injured. She asked, I heard that Ding Qi had to be with you for 3 years before she could leave. You're so weak now. Is it because she died in advance? Do you want Di Zun to save you? Chapter 1134. Ji Yunhuang finally managed to stop coughing, but when he heard Ning Xuema's words, it was as if he had been slapped in the face. His expression changed. No. He took a few steps back and his voice became even softer. No. No. He seemed to be crying and laughing at the same time. She found the serene orchid grass for me. It can undo that function. He trembled as he took out a dried bluegrass and looked at Shun Jili, who was sitting on the throne. A glimmer of hope finally appeared in his eyes as he knelt down. Ancestor, I beg you to save Shueqing. I don't want this grass, I only want her back. I beg you, you must have a way. He was like a drowning man who had finally found a life-saving straw. He looked at Shun Jili with eyes full of hope. Shun Jili silently looked at Ji Yunhuang's soulless appearance. Ji Yunhuang's figure overlapped with Tian Shaoshu's figure. That year, the disciple he was most proud of had also knelt down like this and begged him to save Ling Zai. In his previous life, Tian Shaoshu had regretted it for the rest of his life. In order to make it up to this disciple, he had directly bestowed Tian Shueqing to him in this life. Who would have thought in the end, the two of them were not fated to meet? Time passed bit by bit. The glimmer in Ji Yunhuang's eyes became weaker and weaker. He was like a drowning man as he said in panic, Ancestor, Shun Juli finally opened his mouth, his tone carrying a trace of coldness. Since you don't love her, why not let her go? Ji Yunhuang's body stiffened. He painfully lowered his head and said in a trembling voice, "She is my crown princess. She cannot die." Ning Xuema secretly sighed. Even now, Ji Yunhuang still refused to recognize his feelings for Tian Xueqing. She faintly interrupted from the side. "Crown princess? If you want, there are many women who can be your crown princess. Since you don't love her, what does the crown princess life or death have to do with you? Now that the rules of the cauldron have been broken, you can continue to be a glorious crown prince after you consume this grass. Don't you hate her so much that you want her to die? Now isn't this more to your liking?" Ji Yunhuang closed his eyes. Ning Xuema was right. He had always thought that he hated her so much that his teeth were itching. But he never thought that she would die. She never thought she would leave so soon. He thought that she would pester him for the rest of his life. He thought that their fates would never be separated. Who would have thought? It wasn't until the moment he saw her sink into the ground that his heart ached. Only then did he realize that she was like a wooden wedge that pierced into his heart. He could no longer pull it out. Unknowingly, his gaze had started to revolve around her. He thought that he had noticed her because he hated her too much, but he didn't know that this hatred was actually mixed with love. Because he loved her too much, he hated her. He hated her for using underhanded means to make him unable to leave her. He hated her for scheming so that she could become the crown princess. He knew that she loved him, but as proud as he was, how could he allow himself to be plotted against by her? As long as the incantation was not removed, he would feel uncomfortable and angry whenever he looked at her. That day, he absent-mindedly accompanied Shui Mo to teach her how to write. When the guard told him that the crown princess wanted to see him, his heart couldn't help but beat wildly. He was both excited and nervous. Ever since Ji Yunhuang and Shui Mo got together, she never took the initiative to look for him again. This time, she must be looking for him for something. She must be plotting something. Chapter 1135. Ji Yunhuang told himself over and over again that he could not be fooled by her. He could not be fooled by her. He tried his best to calm his wildly beating heart and calmly summon Tian Xueqing in. She was still wearing her sky-blue clothes, and her expression was distant and indifferent as she stood there. She indifferently said, "Your Highness, I will remove the curse for you." At that moment he was both excited and disappointed. He deliberately said coldly, "Why are you doing this? What are you plotting this time?" Tian Xueqing only smiled faintly. "Xueqing only wants to set your highness free." Seeing her smile, his heart suddenly ached. He thought that this was probably her plan to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. She knew that with this curse on him, she would not be able to obtain his heart. However, if she removed the curse, he might treat her well and grow old with her. Looking at her indifferent expression, he said dryly, "After this matter is done, this prince will compensate you." Tian Xueqing only smiled faintly. "All right." A light breeze blew past, and she had a faint smile on her face. Her gaze was distant, and her blue dress fluttered in the wind. She looked like a fairy that had accidentally landed in the mortal world, and would leave with the wind at any time. Ji Yunhuang suddenly felt a sense of fear of losing her. He unconsciously promised, "This prince will let you be this prince's crown prince consort for a lifetime." Tian Xueqing's gaze was still indifferent, he did not know why, but he deliberately emphasized the words "a lifetime," as if he naively believed that as long as she agreed, they would be together for a lifetime from the beginning to the end. He did not touch Shui Mo. He only treated her as a younger sister, a tool to stimulate Tian Xueqing. During the trip to the ice field, Tian Xueqing had suffered a lot for the serene orchid grass, but her expression had always been indifferent. Her gaze towards him did not have a trace of emotion. He was terrified, he was afraid that Tian Xueqing really did not have any feelings for him, so he used Shui Mo to stimulate her and scold her. Looking at her occasionally revealing sadness, his heart ached terribly, but there was also a trace of joy. Her sadness proved that she still had feelings for him. But when she was sad, his heart also bled. Every moment was a torment of love and hate. He did not expect that she would be so determined to jump down to save Shui Mo. At that moment his heart almost stopped beating. While digging through the ground, he was so flustered that his entire body was trembling, and his mind was blank. However, he subconsciously thought that when she came out, he must tell her that he didn't care about the serene orchid grass or the ink. He only wanted her. He wanted her to stay by his side forever. The moment she rushed out, he almost wanted to kneel on the ground and thank the heavens. However, very soon she was caught by the tentacles. He wanted to drag her up, but his whole body was powerless as she slid down with him. Every word of hers pierced his heart, causing him so much pain that his entire body trembled. He couldn't say a single word and could only call out her name again and again with a pale face. He held onto her tightly, as if he was holding on to the only salvation in his life. The moment she let go, he felt as if his entire world had instantly collapsed, falling apart. It was as if the one who had fallen into the endless abyss was not her, but himself. He had been abandoned by the entire world, and from then on, he could only spend his days in boundless darkness and pain. He dug 3 feet into the ground, but he could no longer find her in the endless tentacles. He thought that the venerable emperor would definitely be able to save Tian Xueqing, so he rushed back to the Sun-Moon sect as fast as lightning, but he kept hearing that the venerable emperor was busy. Chapter 1136. Thus he waited bitterly day after day. Day after day, he was tormented by the pain. In his dreams, Tian Xueqing's green robe was stained with blood. She looked at him indifferently and said, "Let's not meet again in the next life." He missed her every day and was tormented every night. Ji Yunhuang finally recognized his feelings. He begged Shenjuli again and again, "Ancestor, I beg you. I beg you. I just want to see her one more time. See her one more time. Ancestor. Please summon her soul." Shenjuli looked at him for a moment and sighed. Finally he nodded. He waved his hand and a white light condensed in his palm. The white light gradually became transparent and a strange scene flashed across it. Ji Yunhuang held his breath, afraid that he would disturb Shenjuli and let him accidentally miss it. After a long time, Shenjuli shook his head and said, "No." Ji Yunhuang held his breath and his face turned pale. "What do you mean no? Her soul is not there? Why?" Shenjuli also seemed to be puzzled. After a long time he finally opened his mouth and said, "If her soul is not there, there can only be 2 possibilities. First, she is not dead. Second, her soul has already been scattered." Ji Yunhuang sat down on the ground and his face turned pale. He had seen Tian Xueqing being dragged into the ground with his own eyes. It was impossible for her to still be alive. Could it be that her soul had already been scattered? This thought made Ji Yunhuang's whole body tremble. Had she already completely disappeared from this world? No. Impossible. This can't be the result. He stood up and said crazily, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. I don't believe that my fate is like this. I don't believe that Xueqing's fate is like this. I must have been cursed. Xueqing must still be somewhere. She must be waiting for me to save her somewhere. I must go and save her." He turned into a ray of white light and suddenly rushed out. In the blink of an eye he disappeared. Ning Xuema only felt that her heart had sunk into ice water. She sat on the chair motionlessly. Could it be that as long as they were her friends they would be unlucky? Yin Ziyuan jumped off the cliff with Yifeng in her arms. Tian Xueqing was scared out of her wits. Junhuang was delirious. Was this a coincidence or was it that her fate as a cursed loner had unknowingly affected the people around her? She suddenly felt her entire body turn cold. So cold that even her soul was trembling. She wanted to jump up and hide in a place where no one was around. She couldn't get close to anyone, or that person would die. She did not know when Shenjuli had appeared beside her. He frowned when he saw her dazed look. He put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Xuema." Ning Xuema murmured, "God, Tian Xueqing is also dead. Am I really a jinx?" Shenjuli touched her head. "Xuema, this has nothing to do with you." Ning Xuema suddenly tilted her head backwards, avoiding the great god's hand. She inwardly took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Great God, She didn't know how to continue. She was so close to the god. Could it be that she also, this thought made her a little scared. She subconsciously distanced herself from the god. Shunjuli's hand landed on empty air, so he slowly retracted his hand. He looked at her quietly. His gaze was like the surface of a lake, with slight ripples in it. Although she hid it well, Shunjuli could still read the uncertainty and faint fear in her eyes. He sighed again and raised his hand to hug her. Shuema, don't be afraid. Chapter 1137. Shunjuli stroked her hair again and again, as if he was comforting a child who didn't know what to do. His voice was especially gentle at this moment. My destiny is hard, you can't subdue me. Ningxuema suddenly felt a lump in her throat and almost cried, Guru. The feeling of being held in someone's arms and being comforted in a soft voice was so wonderful. It made her heart feel sour and bitter, but at the same time she was greatly touched. It was like a warm current slowly flowing into her heart, washing away her anxiety and uneasiness little by little, leaving only a sense of satisfaction and happiness. Ningxuema tiptoed and gently kissed Shunjuli. With a sigh she whispered, Guru, only you. She only had him. Shunjuli responded by lowering his head, hugging her tightly and deepening the kiss. When the kiss ended, Ningxuema's dark eyes finally had a glimmer of light. She leaned into Shunjuli's arms. Guru, I only have you now. You're not allowed to leave me. You're not allowed to turn your back on me. You're not allowed to. Something. She didn't say the last two words. Her coquettish tone made Shunjuli couldn't help but kiss her again. He kissed her all over until she was out of breath. He lowered his head and solemnly said in her ear, Shuema, I will never turn my back on you. Ningxuema leaned into Shunjuli's arms. She smelled the cool fragrance on his body and listened to his steady and powerful heartbeat. Suddenly she felt sleepy. It was like a person who had walked in the desert for days and finally reached an oasis. While it was sweet and wonderful, it also gradually gave birth to a sense of exhaustion after a storm. However, the atmosphere now was so wonderful that she couldn't bear to fall asleep. Shunjuli could tell that she was sleepy. He caressed her hair and said, I'll give you a day off today. Go and sleep. Then, he carried her in a princess carry and sent her back to her room. Ningxuema nestled in his arms at ease. Occasionally, she would raise her eyes and see Shunjuli's perfect side profile. Her heart was in a trance. She was really lucky to be able to make such an outstanding man fall so deeply in love with her. Most importantly, they loved each other deeply. She slowly closed her eyes and fell into a deep dream. Everything before him was pitch black. Ningxuema seemed to have fallen into a bottomless abyss. She kept sinking until she sank into a dark end. She stood up and suddenly saw a little girl standing not far away in the middle of the black smoke. She was dressed in a bright red dress and was fair and tender. Her facial features could not be seen clearly, but based on his intuition, it should be an exquisite and sweet face. Judging from his figure, he seemed to be around 3 or 4 years old. A childish voice sounded, You're here. Ningxuema took a step back to put some distance between them. She asked cautiously, Who are you? Why are you here? The little girl giggled like a little angel. However, in this empty and silent abyss, it seemed a little creepy. Finally, she laughed enough and said sweetly, I am you. You and I are one. Ningxuema's heart skipped a beat. Could this little girl be the demon that was causing trouble in her dantian? She was even more cautious, but she did not show it. She also revealed a relaxed smile. Whose child are you? Why are you talking nonsense? The little girl did not speak. She just tilted her head and looked at her with an innocent face, motionless. Ningxuema just looked at her quietly with a calm face. She was actually thinking of a countermeasure and how to leave this place. She did not expect that the monster in her dantian would actually take a human form. This was not good news. Chapter 1138. The little girl curled her lips and squinted her eyes like a lazy kitten. Momo, you are me and I am you. Don't keep thinking about how to deal with me. Ningxuema was startled. This brat knew how to read minds. The little girl stretched lazily and said impatiently, I said that I am you, so I know all of your thoughts. Don't try to avoid me. There was a hint of mockery in her playful voice. Ning Xuema did not say anything. She did not know what to do now. When the opponent knew all of your thoughts, it was definitely a terrifying thing. The little girl stretched out her small hand and grabbed a wisp of black gas and played with it. Her voice was still soft and childish with a hint of naivety. Momo, are you really not planning to leave the great god? You will jinx him to death? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat, but her expression was very calm. She tried her best to empty her mind and not think about anything. The little girl was stunned. Then she clapped her hands and giggled. Momo is really smart, you can actually empty your mind. But it's useless. Her sweet voice continued, Momo, look. First it was Yifeng, then it was Yan Ziyuan, then it was Tian Shueching, then it was Ji Yunhuang. Her voice gradually became softer. Suddenly, her voice sounded like thunder and every word was frightening. Momo, who do you think is the next one? Who is the next one? Who is the next one? The thunderous voice replayed in Ning Xuema's ears again and again. Her body could not help but tense up and she was extremely nervous. She closed her eyes and retorted loudly, there is no next one. The little girl's voice was very strange, as if it directly sounded in her mind, making Ning Xuema unable to block her ears and refuse to listen. The voice became softer again and changed into a sweet child's voice, but it carried a devilish temptation. Momo, there are many people you care about. Who do you think is the next one? Is it Uncle Zhong? Tom? Or Shijue? Elian Shao? Or is he the sovereign of this world? He took you in as his disciple, got injured because of you, and had the closest relationship with you. Ning Xuema couldn't help but think of the Almighty's face. That voice suddenly screamed, it's him. It was him. He'll be the next one to die from your curse. Ning Xuema felt a knot in her heart. She was so shocked by the sound that she almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. She looked at the child and said coldly, I'm telling you I won't. The image of the Almighty holding her in his arms, combing her hair, and comforting her flashed through her mind. Xuema, don't be afraid. Her confidence was boosted, and a warm current flowed through her heart, as though it could cleanse the endless abyss. The little girl raised her eyebrows slightly and revealed a cute smile. Momo, let's wait and see. With a gentle wave of her hand, Ning Xuema felt her body become light and she slowly floated up. She floated higher and higher until she finally touched the light above her. She inadvertently lowered her head and saw the little girl in the abyss standing there quietly. Seeing Ning Xuema looking at her, she revealed a smile and moved her lips. Ning Xuema didn't need to read her lips to know what she was saying. Momo, let's wait and see. Ning Xuema suddenly woke up with a start and gasped for breath. Only then did she discover that her whole body was drenched in cold sweat. Chapter 1139. She slowly calmed down and used a cleansing spell to dry herself. Then, she got up and poured herself a glass of water. While drinking the water, she sorted out her messy thoughts. The dream just now was still vivid in her mind. She remembered the little girl's words word for word. She said she was her. What did that mean? Was she suffering from schizophrenia? Impossible. Was this her inner demon? An inner demon that had materialized? Could it be that she was a jinx and had a destiny of being an axe soldier because of this little girl in her body? The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became. No, she had to discuss it with the Almighty tomorrow and let him take a look at her. But now she needed to rest first. Thinking of this, Ning Xuema slowly laid down on the bed. But when she closed her eyes, her soul seemed to sink. She was so frightened that she opened her eyes. She was definitely having a nightmare. She had to find the Almighty now. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. She ran out like a whirlwind and rushed to Shenjuli's main hall. When she reached the main hall, she was stunned. The main hall was still brightly lit. Did the Almighty not sleep? She walked in slowly and saw Shenjuli sitting cross-legged on the big bed. His eyes were slightly closed. There was a colorful light flowing around him, giving him a layer of holy light. The Almighty was meditating. It was better for her not to disturb the Almighty. Once a cultivator was disturbed, it was easy for him to go crazy. Ning Xuema knew this very well. She gently climbed to the other side of the bed and quietly hugged her knees as she looked at the Almighty's back. Anyway, she couldn't sleep now. Once she slept, she would see the weird little girl teasing her. She might as well cultivate with the Almighty. She looked at the Almighty's back view and nodded slowly. Eventually, she fell asleep. Someone gently laid her down and covered her with a blanket. He sighed softly in her ear. "Silly child." She unconsciously reached out her hand and mumbled, "Almighty." Shunjuli grabbed her hand and said softly, "I'm here." Hearing this response, Ning Xuema finally felt relieved. She found a comfortable position in his arms and fell asleep. Shunjuli hugged her and flicked off the lights. He had a dreamless night. When Ning Xuema opened her eyes, she saw a field of snow white. She was stunned for a moment. She raised her head and was met with a pair of deep blue eyes. "You're awake?" Shunjuli asked quietly, holding a strand of her hair in his hand. Ning Xuema was a little dazed from her sleep. She had an ignorant look on her face and looked particularly easy to bully. Shunjuli's eyes darkened. He hugged her and kissed her on the lips. He did not hesitate to give her a French kiss. When the kiss ended, Ning Xuema was still in a daze. "Guru, why are you on my bed?" Shunjuli was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself and would pounce on her one day. So they had been sleeping in separate rooms. Shunjuli's eyes had a touch of amusement. He said with a faint smile, "Who climbed onto my bed in the middle of the night when I was meditating? Then you slept like a little dead pig." Ning Xuema then remembered that she had rushed over last night. She wanted to cultivate with the Almighty, but she didn't expect to fall asleep first. She couldn't help but blush. She coughed softly, cough that. Shunjuli's eyes had a deeper smile. He couldn't help but tease her. "Can't resist your yearning." Chapter 1140. Ning Xuema glared at him, coughed lightly, and got up from the bed. She always felt that when talking in bed, the topic would uncontrollably drift in a certain direction, and then it would get out of hand. After sitting up, she finally remembered her purpose of coming here. She said seriously, "Almighty, I have something important to tell you." Shunjuli finally got up lazily. With his movements, his collar was slightly messy, revealing his white jade-like chest. His voice carried a unique laziness when he just woke up. "What's the matter? Almighty, you evildoer. Can't you tidy up your clothes a bit?" Ning Xuema glanced at him and then looked away. She was almost seduced by the Almighty to the point that she forgot her business. She sorted out the messy thoughts in her head and said seriously, "Almighty, I had a dream last night." She recounted the conversation she had with the little girl last night without holding anything back. Shunjuli's expression slowly became serious. Without waiting for her to finish, he pulled her wrist and quietly took her pulse. After a while, he let go of her hand and said calmly, "It's nothing. It's just an inner demon." Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. "Inner demon? What inner demon?" Shunjuli patted her head and took advantage of the opportunity to pull her down. "Every immortal cultivator will have an inner demon before breaking through to Earth rank level 8. Master will teach you a set of mental cultivation methods. Come, sleep with Master for a while." Ning Xuema. "Come, sleep with Master for a while, Almighty. Don't you think that your words are shocking? Whose disciple has the ability to sleep with others?" It was strange. Ning Xuema had just woken up, but in the Almighty's arms, she fell into a deep sleep again. Shunjuli looked at her in his arms with a serious expression. He didn't expect that the inner demon in her body had already materialized. At this time, Ning Xuema was already asleep. Naturally, the inner demon in her body was also asleep. He hadn't prepared all the ingredients yet, so he couldn't awaken the inner demon in her. His hand was as fast as lightning, and he tapped on one of her acupuncture points. A ray of white light slowly seeped in and gradually disappeared. After doing all this, Shunjuli let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at her relaxed sleeping face, the expression in his eyes changed several times, as if he had to make a difficult decision. In the end he sighed softly. "I can't drag this out any longer." When Ning Xuema woke up again, the Almighty was not by her side. She felt that she was about to go crazy from sleeping, so she left the main hall and strolled around outside. Sunset clouds filled the sky above Heavenly Sound Peak. But Ning Shuama couldn't find the great deity anywhere. In the end, when she arrived at Luoying Cliff, she saw the great deity standing there. His white robe was loose and fluttering in the wind. His back was facing her, as if he could leave with the wind at any moment. Ning Shuama pursed her lips and stepped forward to stand beside the Almighty. Almighty, is there something on your mind? Shun Juli put his arm around her waist and looked at her. No, he said. After a while, Shun Juli spoke again. He stroked her hair and said lightly, Shuama, I have to go on a long trip. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. Where are you going? I'll go with you. Shun Juli paused for a moment and continued to comb her hair. No, only I can go there. Your skills are still too weak to go. You have to stay at the Tianin Peak. You can't go anywhere, understand? Ning Shuama looked up at him and stared into his eyes. Is it very dangerous? Shun Juli patted her head and nodded silently. Ning Shuama tightened her grip on the Almighty's robe. She took a deep breath and asked, when will you be back? Chapter 1141. Shun Juli muttered, half a month at most. Alright, half a month wasn't too long. She would just wait here. Her gaze fell on Shun Juli. How many attendants did you bring? She would feel more at ease if there were more people. Shun Juli shook his head slightly. Only I can go to that place. No one else can enter. Don't worry, I know what to do. Since he said this, Ning Shuama could only nod her head. Alright, you have to come back in one piece. Shun Juli couldn't help but smile. Of course. The thing that wants to make me incomplete hasn't been born yet. This sentence was very imposing, but it also made Ning Shuama feel more at ease. She knew that he was telling the truth. In this world, she really hadn't seen anyone who could be his opponent. Although it was a lonely world without opponents, it could make his family feel at ease and know that he would be fine. She hugged his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. I believe you. I'll wait for you to come back. I'll wait for you to come back. It was just a few simple words, but it made Shun Juli's heart feel warm. All these years, no matter where he went, he came and went alone. He never said hello to anyone, and he never made anyone wait for him. He was as free as the wind, but now there was a tie, a warm tie. This kind of tie finally gave birth to a kind of desire. He longed to come back before he even set off. He lowered his eyes to look at her. She had been hugging his arm tightly, as if he would disappear immediately. There was even a hint of sadness in her bright eyes. He couldn't help but laugh. Don't you want to keep a little distance from me? Don't you want a little private space occasionally? Ah, that's true. Ning Shuama let go of his arm and patted him on the shoulder like a brother. Go Dizun. Go find what you want to find. The flowers haven't bloomed yet, so you can slowly return. Shun Juli was speechless. He casually pulled her into his embrace, and there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. Do you miss me so much that you can't sleep? The great god also knows how to tease. You know how to say sweet nothings now? Ning Shuama raised her hand and rubbed his chin. Then she raised her fingertips. It was the standard gesture of a young ruffian teasing a virtuous woman. However, she was a little shorter than Dizun, so it was a little difficult for her to do this. Guru, after you leave, I will eat and sleep well. I will live my own personal world well. She actually liked being alone. Being alone was as free as the wind, and she could go wherever she wanted. He was extraordinarily independent. She didn't know when it started, but as long as she was by his side, she couldn't help but want to lean on him and snuggle up to him. It turned out that when love came, even a strong and independent woman would want a warm embrace to shelter her from the wind and rain. Even she herself didn't believe that there would be a day when she would be like a little bird that relied on others. However, she naturally showed it when she was beside him. She didn't feel uncomfortable at all, and didn't feel out of place at all. It was as if this was how it should be. These days she had been sticking to the great god. They really didn't separate day and night. Other than real physical intimacy, they did everything that couples should do. She really couldn't stand being together all day long. Now that the great god was going to leave for half a month, she really had to plan this half a month and make it more meaningful. She was thinking about what to do in this half a month when Shun Juli patted her head and glanced at her. What are you thinking about? Chapter 1142. I'm thinking about what I should do in this half a month. There seems to be a lot of things to do. I haven't taken a good look around the Sun Moon sect or chatted with the junior disciples. I haven't even met all the senior disciples. This time I want to visit all of them. Ning Xuema counted with her fingers. After counting, she suddenly felt that half a month wasn't enough. Great God, you don't have to rush this time. You don't have to worry about me. It's fine even if it takes another 10 days or half a month. Ning Xuema generously gave him more time. Shen Juli was speechless. He raised his hand and knocked on her head. What are you thinking about? In the half a month when I'm not here, you have to practice hard. You're not allowed to leave the heavenly sound peak. You have to master the heart technique that I taught you. When I come back, I'll check on your homework. If I find out that you're disobedient, I have ways to punish you. Ning Xuema placed a hand on his shoulder and leaned on him. What kind of punishment? Ning Xuema asked. What punishment? Shen Juli held her mischievous hand and narrowed his eyes. He seemed to be threatening and teasing her at the same time. I'll torture you until you're better off dead. This sentence could be interpreted in several ways. Ning Xuema suddenly remembered that these days the great god had some bad habits when they were together. Her heart trembled. The great god looked calm and untainted. In fact, once the great god let loose, he was really unrestrained. Especially when he was with her. His tricks were too much for her to handle. Other than that last step, she had already been devoured by him until there was nothing left of her. Not even the dregs of tofu left. Ning Xuema was naturally not a passive person. Her eyes moved and her lips curled into a smile. She suddenly raised her head and hugged his neck. She gently bit his earlobe. Great God, if I listen to you obediently, what kind of reward will you give me when you come back? Her warm breath lingered in his ears as her small white teeth bit his earlobe. It was slightly painful and ticklish, but that ticklish feeling almost reached his heart. It made him feel as if there was an electric current flowing through his body, and his lower abdomen felt bloated and painful. His eyes deepened, and he pulled this coquettish little demoness off his body. With a casual press, he pressed her down on the stone table beside him. He leaned over and looked into her eyes. What reward do you want? His voice was slightly hoarse. Ning Xuema blinked. A reward? Let me think. She was deep in thought when she suddenly thought of something. Great God, the congealed frost fruit on the crimson afterglow peak tastes pretty good. Why don't you bring it back as a reward for me? Shunjali. This bad girl. She had clearly brought up an ambiguous topic and looked like she was going to tease him. Yet, the topic of conversation suddenly changed to this. He smiled and touched her red lips with his finger. Good. If you're obedient, not only will I bring you the congealed frost fruit, I will also give you a mysterious reward. How about that? What mysterious reward? Ning Xuema grabbed his hand. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed, but you will definitely remember it for the rest of your life. Shen Jili kept her in suspense. All right. The great god always liked to keep people in suspense. If he didn't say anything, even if you used torture, you wouldn't be able to force him to say it. So Ning Xuema didn't ask any more questions. The two of them were silent for a while. They both knew that they were going to separate. Although they didn't say anything, there were traces of sorrow that began to spread. Ning Xuema held his hand and interlocked their fingers. Great God, come back soon. Chapter 1143. Don't run around and don't leave the Tianyin Peak. If you're bored, wait for me to come back and bring you there. Shen Jili couldn't help but remind her again. Ning Xuema burst out laughing. Guru, you're so long-winded too. He was treating her like a child, but it still made her feel warm and touched. Shen Jili was silent for a moment. Then he finally said, Xuema, wait for me. Ning Xuema nodded and said seriously, I'll be right here and won't run around. I'll practice diligently and wait for you to come back. On the first day after the guru left, Ning Xuema felt like she was finally free. She practiced for the whole morning and took a nap. In the afternoon, she called Yelu Jing, and up and chatted with him for a while to understand the situation in the Sun Moon sect. She slept alone at night and didn't run to the guru's bedroom to say goodnight like before. She wasn't used to it, but she just smiled and rolled around on the bed. She said, "The feeling of freedom is really good." Then she lay down and fell asleep. She didn't have any dreams until the next morning. The next day, she looked at the sun that had risen high in the sky and was a little stunned. Then she jumped up again. Too late. Too late. The guru asked her to wake up at dawn every day to report to him for practice. Now it was the end of the morning and she was late for almost 4 hours. She would be punished by the guru. She packed up quickly like a whirlwind, but when she was about to rush out of the door, she suddenly remembered that the guru had left and wouldn't supervise her anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief and slowly ran to the practice field. She practiced there for a while and it was already noon. She was quite careless with her practice that day, so she took it as a holiday for herself. When it was time to sleep at night, she said goodnight to herself and lay down to sleep. Speaking of which, it was strange. At first, she was afraid that the weird little girl in her dantian would pull her into some void to cause trouble, but she slept peacefully for 2 days. That little bastard didn't come to disturb her again, which made her very relieved. On the 3rd day, she didn't wake up early. She got out of bed lazily and dressed herself lazily. She didn't know why, but everything she did was a little emotionless and she couldn't lift her spirits. After she finished practicing, she couldn't help but run to the Almighty's bedroom to take a look. Then, he ran to his practice room and began to practice his mental cultivation method. Just like that, another day passed. The 4th day, the 5th day, the 6th day, and even the 7th day, she continued to work and rest as usual, but she couldn't help but count the days with her fingers. His concern was like the land after the spring breeze, sprouting green buds of longing and spreading. On the 8th day, she finally couldn't help but take out the voice transmission talisman. She picked it up, put it down, and picked it up again. In the end, he put it away. The Almighty had said that the place he was going to was a forbidden area, and the voice transmission talisman would not be able to reach him. Even if she could contact him, Ning Shuama had no intention of contacting him. What if the Almighty was fighting with a certain fiend? If she contacted him blindly, he would be distracted. Time flowed like water, slowly slipping away as she waited. When it was close to half a month, she suddenly wished that time would flow slower. In the deepest part of her heart, she was afraid that he wouldn't come back. The feeling of freedom that she felt when he first left was long gone. There was only a heavy longing and a heavy worry. The Almighty would come back. The Almighty would be fine. Perhaps when she woke up, the Almighty would look at her from her bedside and then wake her up to practice. Chapter 1144. She comforted herself like this every night before she went to bed. However, when she woke up the next day, she was disappointed to see an empty house. "Guru, I've been waiting here for you to come back. Why haven't you come back yet?" "Heavenly Lone Star, you're a heavenly Lone Star. Your friends and family will all die because of you. You'll always be alone." A childish voice rang out in his mind. It was a voice that sounded childish and tempting. "That's not true. That was all nonsense. I don't believe such a thing." Another voice in his head refuted subconsciously. "You don't believe it? Then are Yi Feng and Yin Ziyuan dead? Is Tian Shueqing dead? They died because of you. They didn't have a good ending because of you." "Bullshit. Shut up. Their deaths were just a coincidence. I tried my best. Your friends are like quicksand. The tighter you hold on to them, the harder it is to hold on to them. Poor child, you have indeed tried your best, but your efforts will only accelerate their tragedy. Why don't you let them go? Turn into a demon, hand you over to me, and I will be able to change your fate. You will become happy, and you will no longer have any worries." The voice guided him patiently. Dream on. Dream on. What kind of monster are you? Get the hell out of there." Ning Shuama screamed as she woke up from her nightmare drenched in sweat. She sat up abruptly. The demonic voice finally disappeared from her head. She took a deep breath. Her fingers touched her dantian. Her fingertips were slightly cold. There was a monster living inside her, a demon-like child. The child's voice started to appear in her head frequently a few days ago. She had used her inner vision to check many times, but she couldn't see the child. She could only see a chaotic darkness. It was as boundless as the end of the world. It made her feel frightened. The guru said that she had a demon in her heart. As long as she practiced diligently, she would be able to get rid of the demon. However, these days she had a feeling that the demon was getting stronger. There were a few times when she felt like she was in a dream. It annoyed her to no end. She jumped out of bed, washed up a little, and went out. The scenery outside the door was still the same. The trees, the courtyard, the mountain rocks. Every blade of grass, every tree, every pavilion, and every courtyard were as beautiful as a painting, but she had no interest in admiring them. It had been a month. The Almighty had been gone for a month. There was no news from him for a month. No matter how she tried to contact him, she couldn't get in touch with him, and she could only be trapped on the heavenly sound peak, unable to do anything. Every day, other than cultivating, she could only stroll around the heavenly sound peak, unable to go anywhere else. In the beginning, she was worried that if she blindly contacted him, it would distract him. She might even be in danger, so she suppressed her emotions and waited patiently every day. However, after half a month, she began to lose her cool and began to try to contact him using the sound transmission talisman. However, he couldn't get in touch with her, and she didn't seem to want to pick up. What happened to him? Could it be that he had encountered a great danger? Could it be that his life was in danger? All kinds of worries came one after another, making her restless day and night. However, at this time the demon in her heart was getting stronger day by day. If her mind wavered a little, it would take advantage of the situation and make her even more confused. She went to the Almighty's bedroom, and everything in the palace was still the same. Chapter 1145. The utensils used by the Almighty were still shiny and clean as if he had never left them. Ning Xuema picked one up and started to wipe it. This was a task she had recently found for herself. She had to have something to do to pass the time. Shun Juli, the most powerful person in the continent, was the only man who was not afraid of her terrifying fate. He was so strong and powerful that no one in the world was his match. He should not have encountered any real danger, right? Perhaps he did not return because he had not found what he wanted. As long as he found it, he would come back. That must be it. Do you really think he will come back? Maybe he is already dead. Otherwise, if he promised you that he would come back in half a month, why is he still not back after a month? Even if he could not find what he wanted, he should be able to send you a message when he is free, right? But he did not. Something must have happened to him. Perhaps he was cursed to death by you. Aha, you are a jinx. Since he was so good to you, he will naturally die. The voice in her mind sounded again, with a hint of schadenfreude. Get lost. Ning Xuema was annoyed. She waved her hand and a utensil fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Ning Xuema was speechless. She looked at the utensil. It was a porcelain vase. She had made it a few days ago and placed it on the table. She did not expect that she would smash it into pieces today. Even if it was sticky, it would not stick. Is this a sign? An ominous sign. Maybe he is really dead. The voice sounded again. Ning Xuema took a deep breath. Suddenly, she raised her hand and swept an inkstone off the table, causing it to fall to the ground and shatter into pieces. She raised her head and smiled. It was as if she was refuting the voice that appeared in her mind, but it was also as if she was comforting herself. He will be fine. She closed her eyes and used the mental cultivation method that the Almighty taught her to suppress her inner demons. After a while, she finally calmed down. She squatted down and started to clean up the broken pieces. The Almighty loved cleanliness. If he came back and saw the broken pieces, he would not be able to sleep well. When she was cleaning up the broken pieces, she cut her hand again. The wound was not big, but it made her dazed for a moment. Everything seemed to be going wrong today. Did something really happen to the Almighty? This thought was like a fire. Once it was born, it would become a prairie fire. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried her best to stabilize her emotions. The great God had said that her fate was special, and that she had a physique that could easily attract disasters. Therefore, before he left, he repeatedly ordered her not to leave the Tianyin Peak. He also instructed his 5 disciples to watch over her at all times, afraid that she would accidentally cause any accidents when he was not around. She didn't want to worry the Almighty, so she endured it and stayed on the peak day after day. She really wanted to find the Almighty, but she didn't know where he had gone. She could only wait helplessly. She felt like she was going to turn into a stone waiting for her husband. After cleaning up the debris on the ground, she wiped the other things again. When he was by her side, she didn't feel that time was unbearable. But after he left, she felt a bone-piercing loneliness and longing. She had never been so concerned about someone in her life. It turned out that worrying about someone was so unsettling that it was hard to calm down. Seeing that it was dark outside, she took out the sound-transmitting talisman and tried to contact him again. Still, it was to no avail. The sound-transmitting talisman didn't light up at all. Chapter 1146. Great God. Shenjuli, regardless of whether you found that thing or not, at least send me a message. Even if it's just a hey, it's fine. As long as I know that you're safe, why won't you say a word to me? She simply lay on Shenjuli's bed. Her eyes were wide open, but she didn't dare to sleep. Now, as long as she closed her eyes, she would dream and be harassed by her inner demons. There seemed to be a slight noise at the door. Her heart jumped, and she immediately turned around to look. Then, she held her breath. The door creaked open, and a white figure stood at the door. The moonlight gilded his back with a layer of faint silver, and his handsome face was half hidden in the darkness. Although Ning Xuema couldn't see his face clearly, she could recognize him from his figure and temperament. Shenjuli. He finally came back. He still knew to come back. At this moment, Ning Xuema's mind was blown. She was ecstatic, but her heart was filled with grievances. Her nose was sour and tears welled up in her eyes. Did he know that she was worried to death? Did he know that she was almost crazy from worrying about him? Did he know that she missed him so much that she almost broke down? Before she could think of what to do, she had already jumped up from the bed and fiercely threw herself at him. Great God! Why did you come back? She wanted to fiercely shout a few words at him, but just as she said one sentence, her throat seemed to be choked and she couldn't continue. She directly threw herself into his arms and desperately hugged his waist. Tears flowed down her cheeks, and her nose couldn't breathe. Why did you come back so late? Do you know that I was worried to death? With great difficulty, she suppressed her grievances and wanted to shout a few words at him, but her body stiffened, and she suddenly opened her eyes wide. A sword! A sword the color of the moonlight. It fiercely pierced through her chest, accurately pierced through her heart, and came out from her back. That sword was extremely sharp and was a gift from her to him. He had always kept it with him, but now it had become the culprit behind her assassination. The sword was so sharp that she didn't even feel it when it pierced her flesh. By the time she reacted, she was already skewered on his sword like a candied hawthorn. The delayed pain made her face turn pale, and her eyes widened in disbelief. His face was reflected in her eyes. She finally saw his face clearly and her heart felt as if it had been thrown into ice water. Wuemo. The person who came was not Shenjuli, but his former substitute, Wuemo. Wumo's figure was exactly the same as Shenjuli's. Even their facial features were almost the same. They were at least 99% similar. If one wasn't the person closest to them, it would be hard to tell them apart when they stood together. The only difference between these two people was that Wuemo was always expressionless. When his sword pierced through Ning Xuema's body, he didn't even move his eyebrows. He was as cold as a statue. As for Shenjuli, although he was also incomparably cold, he often had some expressions on his face. Ning Xuema had been with him for a long time, so she could tell at a glance. When Wuemo was punished by Shenjuli and imprisoned in the underground cold prison, Ning Xuema and the Almighty had almost forgotten the existence of this person after they met. She occasionally asked who this Wuemo was, and the Almighty's answer was somewhat zen. He said that Wuemo was the one who had been with him for the longest time. Since he could remember, Wu Mo had been by his side as his substitute. Other than that, there was no further explanation. Chapter 1147. The Almighty's explanation was ambiguous. Later on, because of other things, she forgot to ask him again. Later on, when she thought about it, she felt that since Wu Mo had been by the Almighty's side for as long as he could remember, and the two of them looked so similar, there was only one possibility. Wu Mo was the Almighty's twin brother. She did not know why, but he only wanted to be the Almighty's substitute later on, because too many things happened and the Almighty urged her to practice martial arts. She didn't have the time to think about Wu Mo. She only knew that he was punished by the Almighty and was locked up. She didn't expect that he would appear here today. She thought that the Almighty had finally returned. She was so excited that she didn't think twice before throwing herself at him. She was anxious to hug him and feel his real body to soothe her surging emotions. She didn't expect that he would be a substitute. She also didn't expect that he would assassinate her without saying a word. This sword was ruthless and didn't give her any chance to live. It was obvious that Wu Mo really wanted to kill her. At that moment, Ning Xuema couldn't think too much. Fortunately, she used to be a secret agent and had a strong psychological quality. She could quickly calm down when she received a fatal blow. Almost instinctively, she slapped him with her palm, using the empty-handed blade block technique to attack him. Wu Mo probably didn't expect that she could still fight back when her heart was stabbed. Moreover, her attack was aimed at the enemy's vital point. The angle was tricky and the palm was strong. Even if Wu Mo was in a hurry, he couldn't block her attack. He subconsciously let go of his hand and took a step back. Ning Xuema also took a few steps back when he let go of her hand. Blood flowed down the sword and dripped on the clean floor like blooming red spider lilies. Her face was deathly pale. She pressed her palm on the hilt of the moonlight sword. She was a doctor herself, so she naturally knew the consequences of being stabbed. Her heart meridian had been pierced, and her life was like a flickering candle flame in the wind, about to be extinguished at any time. Why do you want to kill me? This was what she didn't understand the most. She didn't have any deep hatred with him, right? Although he gave her a lot of problems when he pretended to be Shunjuli, he didn't mean to kill her. What was the reason this time? What was the reason for him to use his ultimate move on her as soon as they met? Why was the Almighty's moonlight sword in his hands? Thousands of questions swirled in her mind. After she asked this question, she quietly moved to the window. Since Wu Mo was standing at the door, she could only escape through the window if she wanted to ask for help. Unfortunately, the window was tightly shut. She had no choice but to break the window and jump out to call for help. But would she have the chance? She had yet to cultivate an immortal body, and the sword in her heart only had the word death. The reason why she could still stand here and not fall was because the sword had yet to be pulled out. Once the sword was pulled out, she would definitely die. That empty-handed blade block had almost used up all of her strength. Her vision was turning black, and there was a fishy taste in her mouth. Wu Mo looked at her coldly, but he did not follow up with another attack. He knew that with the power of his sword, she would not be able to survive. Hearing her question, he only coldly replied, "You must die. I can't let you harm him anymore." Was it because of her identity as a heavenly loner? Ning Xuema took another step back. Her face as pale as a sheet of paper. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.